Chapter 222. Huaisher heard the sound of the door being pushed open. As a host, he had some privileges. Relying on the perception of the zombies, he could see the appearance of the first wave of challengers that rushed in. When he saw the face of the leader, he couldn't help but chuckle. Wasn't this an acquaintance? In the dark hall of the castle, a few vigilant sublimators were looking around. The person walking at the front was the director of the Seven Stars group, Chui, who wanted to make friends with Huaisher and Ginza. Beside him, there were three teammates who also left because they didn't return home for the night. They seemed to be trembling with fear and were eroded by the dark atmosphere of the castle. At the back, a panic-looking sublimator asked in a low voice, "Director Chui, isn't it a bit... idiot? What do you know?" Without waiting for Director Chui to answer, the sublimator walking behind Director Chui glanced over and angrily scolded, "Is Director Chui's decision something you can question? And Yongshun, is this how you talk to your seniors?" Director Chui smiled and waved his hand gracefully. "Chief Park, don't be so angry. Director and also cares about everyone's safety. A little wavering won't make people question his loyalty to the group." "You're right." Chief Park nodded and was about to say something when Director Chui waved his hand. "Okay, since we're here, don't use the company's position to call each other. Everyone is a teammate who entrusted their lives to each other. There's no Director Chui here, only everyone's brother Chui Zaiqing. Please believe me, I will definitely lead everyone to break through this difficulty." The impromptu speech boosted the morale. At least on the surface, the three subordinates' blood was boiling. "Brother Chui." Park Ji-chung was just about to call on Director when Chui Zaiqing glanced at him. He changed the way he addressed Chui Zaiqing and asked, "I just don't understand your painstaking efforts, big brother. Why do the four of us have to spend all our precious yellow tickets to get the opportunity to enter this project?" One had to know that all the projects could be divided into three categories according to the risk assessment in the introduction book. Among them, the Ghost Castle was neither the highest nor the lowest. It was the most mediocre project. It looked ordinary and unremarkable, but Director Chui had chosen this project while everyone else was rushing up and down. "It's simple. Is our goal just to clear the stage?" Chui Zaiqing looked around at his teammates and said solemnly, "Even if we clear the stage and qualify for the competition, we are already far behind the others. If we work hard, we can only accompany them in the end. Why can't we find a way to go further?" Pu Ji-chung immediately exclaimed in admiration and said respectfully, "Could it be that Brother Chui is planning to replace him?" "That's right." Chui Zaiqing clasped his hands behind his back and said proudly, "Among all the projects, this is the purest evil spirit project. It is also the field that our stigmata are best at dealing with. As long as we cooperate closely, we can eliminate the host's geographical advantage to the greatest extent and create an opportunity to kill him." When he spoke, he did not lower his voice and let his words reverberate in the dark castle. He intended to create psychological pressure on the host so that the other party would not dare to attack easily. Even if the other party did not show up, they could seize the opportunity to clear the stage. After getting precious experience, they could calmly find another target. "Oh, I really made a mistake." Huaisher sat next to the generator and was stunned. He did not expect these people to be so beautiful even though they did not look good. Originally, he said that they would look at the situation in the first wave and make more attempts. He did not expect these good brothers who came to give away points were so brave. Well, this time he would be a little more serious. Huaisher's stomach couldn't help but start to plot evil tricks. This time, he would show these country bumpkins the power of the looming hall. He swung the axe lightly, dragged the heavy weapon, and slowly walked into the darkness. He did not know whether it was because they understood Director Chui's good intentions and lofty ambitions or purely flattering. The remaining three people all applauded and praised, and for a moment, flattery flew everywhere. Park Ji-chung was thinking about how to flatter Director Chui without showing his anger, but he did not expect that in Yongshun, the flatterer, would take the lead. He was so anxious that his throat was hot, and he could not help coughing. Chui Zaiqing asked a few words of concern. Was the little comrade hungry? Was he cold? Was his body okay? It was as warm as spring. Park Ji-chung was so excited that his face turned red. He expressed that he would firmly obey Brother Chui's instructions. He was a 7-star brick. He would move wherever he was needed in the cold castle. The friendship between them glowed with a warm light. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. It was just that between the flattery and the sincere words, who knew how much saliva fell to the ground? The virus that no one could see spread in the cold wind and gradually grew, like flowers and plants. Duh. A bit of coldness fell on Li Yunjong's neck, making him stunned for a moment. He felt cold all over his body, but when he touched it, he only felt a trace of water. When he looked up, he saw 2 sections of dead branches and moss growing from the castle ceiling. What's wrong? Park Ji-chung turned around and asked. Although they were busy expressing their loyalty as ascendants, how could they lose the most basic defense? Their hands and hearts were secretly on guard against the surrounding shadows, and they were advancing step by step. Nothing, just a drop of water. Li Yunjong shook his head indifferently. He felt that his breathing was obstructed, so he coughed and spat a mouthful of phlegm. He was too hot. Drip, drip, drip. Water dripped from the withered branches and withered leaves into the messy hall. And Yongshun was not careful with his feet, and he triggered a trap. He was caught by a hidden arrow and ended up in a sorry state. While they were not paying attention, the floor suddenly opened, and a zombie jumped out. It suddenly grabbed Park Ji-chung's leg and opened its mouth to bite him. Park Ji-chung cried out in pain and lifted his leg to kick the zombie, sending it flying to the wall. The force was so great that the zombie that landed on the ground turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared. Everyone, be careful. I'm afraid that these things are the products of this ancient castle. I'm afraid there's something strange inside. Chui Zicheng reminded them. They were all ascendants, and with the sacred mark, their physiques were already fixed. Naturally, they were not afraid of being bitten by zombies. On the other hand, Park Ji-chung was unlucky. He was so angry that he coughed even more violently. He did not know what the zombie was eating every day. Its mouth was full of grass seeds, and it messed up his wound and made it bleed nonstop. After being sent here, they had lost all the relics from the border, not to mention the silver blood potion. They could only tear off a few leaves to bandage their wounds. Sensing the mocking expressions of his companions, Park Ji-chung was so angry that he coughed again. Okay, Ji-chung, don't worry. Chui Zicheng looked around. After walking through the corridor behind the hall, the layout of the entire ancient castle became strange. There were many forks, and he did not know where they led. According to the introduction book, as long as he found 3 generators in this ancient castle and fixed them, he could open the main door and easily pass through. But after seeing those zombies, his confidence soared. How could he be willing to return empty-handed after entering a treasure mountain? He was determined to take down the host here. It should be known that this rookie competition was a rare step for him to advance. One of the 3 giants in the group, the Golden Dew King who held the Tianfu seal in the Xinlua family, seemed to have heard of something. He did not hesitate to send all the elites under his command into this hell and promised to reward them after they returned. If he could suppress Li Zhongxing here and prove his ability in the group, he, who had been stuck at the 3rd stage for a long time, might be able to break through to the 4th stage. While he was observing, he suddenly had an idea. He noticed that the darkness above his head moved slightly, revealing a trace of abnormality. He immediately laughed in his heart. In the end, the host gave away a trace of his identity. He pretended not to know and hinted his subordinates through the fluctuation of origin substance. After taking 2 steps forward, he revealed his back. But he did not expect that a sudden shout would be heard. Big brother, sister-in-law, Happy New Year! Immediately, the darkness suddenly broke apart, and a fat zombie with a head full of grass fell from the sky. It ignored Chui Zicheng, who was wide open, and pounced directly at Park Ji-chung at the back. At the very back, Park Ji-chung raised his head and saw a dark green fatty pouncing at him. His expression changed, and a trace of grievance appeared in his anger. Why the fuck is it me again? Even if he was panicking, he was still a Type 3 sublimator after all. In the face of danger, he did not lose his composure. He raised his leg and kicked out. This kick was imbued with the essence of the Flower Wolf path, coupled with his own soul ability. In an instant, there was a flash of lightning as a ferocious dragon and some other insignificant objects flew out towards the zombie. The fat zombie was immediately blown apart. Like a balloon filled with water, blood splattered everywhere. Caught off guard, everyone was splashed in the face, and they dodged awkwardly. And Yong-shun wiped the blood off his face, but when he touched it, he saw that the zombie's blood was mixed with something else. It was yellow, sticky, and looked like curry. He thought of something and raised his head in shock. He saw that Park Ji-cheng's face was changing colors, and under his trousers, a handful of curry slid down silently, and a foul smell spread out. Park Ji-cheng! And Yong-shun did not understand. He wiped the curry off his face with all his might, and his face was ashen. He shouted angrily, "Are you crazy?" Park Ji-cheng opened his mouth to explain, but his face was getting paler and paler. He could not speak, and he vomited a pile of stinky blood clots, mixed with a few pieces of diseased organs. Then there was a series of muffled sound from his buttocks that no one wanted to hear. As the water splashed, the curry smell became stronger. He vomited and had diarrhea. In an instant, not only in Yong-shun, but Li Yin-chung also screamed in horror. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Damn, there are actually 9 types of abyss virus. In the darkness of the ancient castle, Huaishir counted silently with his fingers. Not to mention a third-stage sublimator. Even a Steel King Kong would not be able to handle these 9 types of abyss virus. The first to spread should be the hell flu, followed by scurvy, the parasitic thorns taking root and sprouting, and the final symptoms looked like abyss dysentery. The scene was so tragic that even Huaishir could not watch it anymore. He could not help but shrink his neck. When he thought of Yuan Zhao, who was struggling like a mountain cat in a litter box, he felt even more pity. Why do you think these poor kids like to fight with shit? Chapter 223. He couldn't bear to watch any longer. With a snap of his fingers, he activated the castle and sent over a dozen zombies. He might as well give them a quick death. Thus, amidst the chaos, the moaning of zombies could be heard from every fork in the road. Amidst the staggering footsteps, more than a dozen zombies ran like wild dogs out of control. Dark green saliva drooled from the corners of their mouths and fell to the ground, causing grass to grow in an instant. Not good, let's go. Cui Zicheng's expression changed. After seeing Pu Ji-cheng's appearance, how could he not know how powerful these zombies' mouths were? He didn't dare to stay in the same place. It didn't matter if he was bitten and died, but what if they started spitting curry too? For a moment, the 3 of them ran away, leaving Pu Ji-cheng vomiting and having diarrhea on the ground covered in blood. He shouted in despair, "Director, save me!" In the next moment, he was swallowed by the zombies. The door closed instantly, blocking the zombies outside the door. The few people in the corridor looked at each other in alarm and coughed violently at the same time. They felt a chill all over their bodies, as if they had caught a cold. A cold? How could an ascender catch a cold? By the time they reacted, they had already sensed that something was wrong. Even if they awakened the sacred mark and tried their best to resist, they couldn't dispel the virus that was like maggots in their bones. They had just been splashed with dog's blood by the zombies that looked like virus packs. How could they be spared? Now, Huaishir had finally figured out how to use the plague aura. He was using the Hilgo's sacred mark to continuously send all kinds of viruses into the parasitic plants in the castle to be transformed. For a moment, countless poisonous seedlings sprouted in the sacred mark, turning this place into a dangerous place. It could be said that the entire castle had almost completely become a poison pool. Who knew how many source viruses had opened patty here, constantly mutating? Dozens of subspecies appeared every minute. He could waste time with this group of people. The more time he spent, the greater his advantage. However, while he was deep in thought, he suddenly realized that there was one more zombie that he could control in the castle. So that's how it is? Thinking of what Kitten had said to him, Huaisha finally understood. He couldn't help but grin. This is really the best place for me. On the system panel, the progress bar had increased slightly, but it was still far from being filled. Although his job was to deal with the challengers and ensure that he was not defeated, it seemed that he would have to work harder if he wanted to achieve a higher completion rate. Well then, let's pick up the pace. He smiled and dragged the axe in his hand. Amidst the ear-piercing sound of the axe scraping against the ground, he passed through the secret passage and walked straight in their direction. In the same place, after the three of them realized that they had been poisoned, two of their subordinates had already begun to panic. However, Cui Ziqing's expression was as calm as Mount Tai. He just waved his hand and said, "Come here." He activated the origin substance and awakened the sacred mark. A faint red sun shone from the top of his head, continuously purifying the viruses and negative origin substances in his body. Firehounds. This was the sacred mark of the sun that had been stolen from the origin code of the Scylla mythology. Naturally, it had some of the divine might of the scorching sun. In an instant, the viruses that had invaded his body were all destroyed. However, immediately after, the expressions of the three of them became awkward. They could hear the sounds in each other's stomachs. Although the viruses and the infected had been purified, the firehounds could only kill the parts that had been infected by the negative origin substances. Due to the limitations of its ability, it could not simply evaporate and wipe them out. As the three of them quickly activated their sacred marks, these harmful parts were quickly expelled from their bodies. The simplest way was after a short silence. Director Cui opened his mouth and asked bitterly, "Is there a toilet nearby?" Due to the urgency of the situation, they could not care too much. In a barren place, they did not necessarily have to find a toilet to solve the problem, right? The other two could just find a random corner to solve the problem. However, as a leader, he could not do something so humiliating in front of his subordinates. Under the awkward gazes of his two subordinates, Cui Ziqing looked at a door beside him. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "You two stand guard outside the door. Be alert. You are not allowed to enter or go far." The two of them immediately agreed. Cui Ziqing pushed open the door and entered. After he closed the door and turned around, he suddenly frowned and looked suspiciously at the corner. Under a pile of rags and broken furniture, there seemed to be something hidden. But when he carefully approached and took a closer look, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. What was that? It had a cute square outline and a dark golden light that seemed to be able to bring happiness to people. Wasn't that the treasure chest that he had missed? In an instant, ecstasy rose from his heart. He even forgot about the churning feeling in his stomach. He almost held his breath. It was unbelievable. Who would have thought that there was a dark gold treasure chest hidden in such a remote corner of the castle? This sudden surprise almost made him dance with joy. But in the midst of the chaos, he still maintained his self-control, afraid that it was a trap set by the host. After using various methods to test it, he finally confirmed that it was indeed a treasure chest without a doubt. He could not help but smile. As long as he could get this treasure, not only would it be more than enough to kill the host, but he would also be able to completely suppress Li Zhongxing. Promotion and wealth were just around the corner. With such a mood, he reached out and opened the treasure chest. Then, he saw a white light rushing towards him. A heroic voice sounded out of nowhere. "Wow, gold normal." Sure enough, it was a gold. Wait, what was gold? Just as he was stunned, he saw that from the treasure chest that suddenly disappeared, a young man holding a flashlight suddenly jumped up, raised his axe, and chopped. Then, he did not know anything. Bang! Through the door, a dull sound came from inside the room, and Yong Shun and Li Yunzai looked at each other in astonishment. Then they sighed. As expected of Director Cui, his voice was so powerful. Even if he used his main account, he would still be so powerful. However, for some reason, Director Cui's luck was so good this time that he did not come out for a long time. The two of them waited for a long time. They were so anxious that they could not hold it in anymore. After looking at each other and confirming that everyone was about to shit, They decided to play rock, paper, scissors to decide who would go to the corner to relieve themselves. In the end, Li Yunzai was one step ahead of Yongshun. He put down the pale-faced Yongshun and proudly ran to the corner to relieve himself. After waiting for a long time, Yongshun could not wait any longer. He shouted at Li Yunzai, "Hey, are you done? Damn it, why are you in such a hurry? Wait a little longer." Li Yunzai cheered up. His face was red. But then, he heard a faint sound, which seemed to be coming from under the floor. Before he could react, he heard a familiar roar. "I want to eat a hot dog." Then, with a hoarse shout, a figure covered in curry sauce jumped out from under the broken floor. It was Park Ji-chung, who had been left behind by them and was being ravaged by the corpses. Now that he had become a zombie, Park Ji-chung was filled with almost eternal hunger. He opened his mouth and bit the meat in front of him, chewing it fiercely. Li Yunzai screamed in pain as his vital part was attacked. He struggled to ask his teammates for help, but Yongshun saw more than a dozen zombies crawling out from under the floor. He was scared out of his wits. He frantically knocked on the door behind him. "Director Chui, Director Chui." In the panic, he even forgot to call him Big Brother. The next moment, with a loud bang, the door was cut open by the axe blade. Then, a ferocious eye appeared from the gap, staring in Yongshun's pale face and grinning. "Why are you looking for him?" Huaishir said. "He said he's not here." Being looked at by the abyss-like eye, he felt as if endless madness and pain were spreading from it. And Yongshun was stunned on the spot. He could not help but scream, and immediately ran away. Huaishir was stunned on the spot. "Too weak. Big Brother, you're at least a second stage ascendant. How can you be so useless? I haven't even finished my horror movie scene, and you're already running away. Do you think I don't care about my reputation?" When he was thinking about this, he did not think about the fact that he had completely covered the whole castle with various plants, and the density of the aura of fear was still increasing. Relying on the almost endless gloomy aura here, the fog formed by the calamity ash was constantly spreading, covering an inch of land, and had already joined in the carnival of the virus. First, he was splashed by Park Ji-sung's curry noodles. Then he watched helplessly as his teammate was eaten by someone else's hot dog, and finally he found out that the backbone of the team had been silently taken down. Now, Yongshun had completely fallen in a panic. He screamed and ran all the way, completely unaware of where he was. He only heard the constant moans of the zombies behind him until he finally saw a door. In an instant, he was almost moved to tears. He rushed over, opened the door, and shut the nightmare behind him outside. And Yongshun panted violently, almost without strength. He leaned against the door and slowly slid to the ground. Then he saw the generator next to him. Generator. As long as the 3 generators were repaired, he could escape from here. His eyes lit up, and he found a glimmer of hope in despair. Then he finally noticed the strange figure behind him. In the darkness, behind the dust-covered table, a faint black aura rose into the sky, enveloping the strange and old evil spirit. It was as if it was reading some evil book or demonic book, focused and serious. Sensing his presence, it slowly raised its head, and the rotten face grinned, revealing a bloodthirsty smile. It was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. And Yongshun stammered, wanting to say something, but in the end, he could only make a squeaking sound and pass out. Before he fainted, a last desperate thought emerged in his mind. In the future, in this life, I'll never eat curry again. Chapter 2:24. It was as if he had a nightmare. Chui Zicheng dreamt that he opened a dark gold treasure chest. 4 bright flashlights shone from the treasure chest in a flash, and then 4 figures jumped out. One held a large shield with red hair, one had purple hair and held a sword, one had silver hair and pouted, and the last one held a crossbow and shouted at him. 4 dazzling white flashlights swayed back and forth in front of him, causing him to have seizures. He was so dizzy that he didn't know where he was. He could only cry out, "Why don't I have a single high talent?" This nightmare lasted for an unknown amount of time. Finally, a dark gold light shone from the treasure chest. A blurry figure rose from the light, holding an axe in his hand, and grinned at him. Swordsman Pagoda, you can't rest yet. He screamed and finally woke up from the nightmare. When he opened his eyes, he found himself hanging upside down in the hall of the castle. In front of him were 17 or 18 zombies and his 3 subordinates. His family was standing in a neat row. When the group of zombies looked at him, they had a strange smile on their faces. It was as if they didn't want this to happen and wanted to feed him. Yo, you're awake? Huaishi's smiling face slowly rose in front of him, and he picked up the mirror in his hand. The sex change operation was very successful. From today onwards, you can also draw 2 clean eyeliner and steel men from little bitches. The person in the mirror had a thin layer of powder on his face. It could be said that he had a picturesque face, but the beard on his face was not shaved clean. He looked like a demon and didn't look like a good person. Chui Zicheng was stunned for a long time. He subconsciously raised his head to look at his lower body. After seeing that both of his brothers were intact, he breathed a sigh of relief. He reacted and glared at Huaishi. You're that bastard from the looming hall. What nasty word, old Chui. To think that I was prepared to warmly welcome you. Huaishi curled his lips and pointed behind him. What do you think of my lineup? Do you want to join us? It's good that we're a family. He really wanted to turn Chui Zicheng into a zombie as well. Even if he would immediately leave after turning into a zombie, even if the remaining body would lose its soul and lose its stigmata, the physique of a level 3 ascendant was still there. Why wouldn't he accept an underling who delivered himself to his doorstep? However, Chui Zicheng's stigmata was a fire hound of the Xinluo lineage. It was a natural counter to Huaishi's dark origin substance. If he didn't cooperate, Huaishi could easily kill him, but he wouldn't be able to obtain his body. Knowing what Huaishi was planning, Chui Zicheng shouted angrily and became even angrier. Dream on, you scum of the human world who is worse than a dog. No matter what you do, I won't give in. Knowing that he would not have a good ending if he fell into the hands of this pervert from Yingzhou, Chui Zicheng cursed angrily for a moment, saying that he was an ugly person who sold sex to a male prostitute, a shameless rat, a treacherous and evil lunatic, and so on. It was quite interesting for Xinluo TV station. Seeing that this good man refused to submit, Huaishi had no other choice. Forget it, I didn't want to use this move in the first place. As he said that, Huaishi raised his hand and stuffed a handful of ash into Chui Zicheng's mouth. Then, he waved his hand and snapped his fingers. Pa! Then, there was the sound of cloth tearing. The 20 or so zombies instantly tore off their clothes and turned into a group of big boss zombies wearing very little cloth. In the corner, the old man who was reading the newspaper pulled the switch and the lights dimmed. The laser ball hanging in the center of the castle started to rotate under the colorful light. Countless white fog of ash rose up, and for a moment, the entire ghost castle looked like a disco. Music! Huaishi stood up and stood in the middle of the zombies. He stretched his body and smiled uneasily. Today, I'll let you see the traditional skills of our orchard gym. The next moment, as the young man waved his hand, impassioned music began to play. Dozens of zombies raised their hands in unison, pressed their faces, twisted their bodies, and sang in unison. Director Chui's eyes widened. A chill ran down his spine. On the screen in the venue, the fierce war had come to an end. It could be called a showdown of black technology. Under the collision of scholars and armies on both sides, modern steel torrents surged. All kinds of guns and short guns released a torrential rain, turning everything into wreckage. As the commander of the weaker side saw the opportunity to retreat, the war came to an abrupt end. In a live broadcast room, Diding smiled slightly. It seems that the battle at Sensoji has come to an end for the time being. I really feel sorry for the Tengu team of Rinxia. They were one step behind and lost an important contract to Sodom Group. At the same time, congratulations to Sodom Group for becoming the second participant organization after the Social Security Bureau to win the contract. In the current second phase of the mission, there were a total of 14 critical places for the participants to attack, representing 14 key items. Different from the various airdrop items that could only be set up in the Xinyue framework, these 14 key border relics were treasures that were contained, produced, or forged in Yamatai. Once obtained, as long as they stayed until the end of the competition, even the competition committee would not ask about it. Once obtained, it would belong to the participants. Other than the 3 contracts that were hard to come by for each organization, the other 11 border relics had different effects depending on the difficulty of the attack. There was no lack of border relics that were S grade and above. According to the information released in the live broadcast room, the most secretive of them were 3 stigmata relics. They were the essence that was nurtured by this hell after many years of immersion. Once the border relics broke through a certain threshold under the influence and nurturing of hell, the internal power would form a constant miracle, such as the stigmata, according to the attribute and nature of the relics. Apart from the fact that these border relics did not have souls, they were no different from ordinary ascendants. As long as they were irrigated with origin substance, it was equivalent to having an extra stigmata. It was needless to say how precious it was. Normally, ascendants would fight to the death for such a thing. This was the reason why so many ascendants, even though they knew how dangerous it was to explore hell, were still willing to risk their lives for so many years. The more dangerous a place was, the more precious treasures were buried, not to mention the many materials needed for advancement and the various opportunities hidden in hell. Now, under the cover of the Shinua framework, the originally dangerous hell had been strengthened by the rules of the Creator. The original danger had been reduced by more than 40%. With the guidance of the system interface, everything was traceable. Moreover, there was also the false life given by the Shinua framework. Death was just an exit. Any participant with a slightly better brain would not give up on such a rare opportunity. Even if they had already guessed that they were working for the Social Security Bureau, with the temptation of great benefits in front of them, they would still run wildly like mules. With a gamble, a bicycle would become a motorcycle. Whether they could eat meat or drink soup depended on whether they were able to give it their all this time. How could they care about anything else? In the short span of a day, who knew how many bloody battles had broken out in Yamatai City? The audience's eyes were burning red. It had been many years since they had seen such a satisfying sight. The atmosphere of the competition was getting higher and higher. Other than the unlucky Ingzhou family, everyone was very happy. In the special seats, the old man from the looming hall was no longer looking at the screen. His face was ashen as he closed his eyes to rest. After such a long stalemate, it was not as if everyone did not know each other's background. He wanted to see how the Social Security Bureau could have such a big appetite to swallow Yamatai City in one gulp. The director team seemed to be afraid that the matter was not big enough. They even gave the old man 2 close-ups. The scene was captured very vividly conveying his incompetent and furious appearance to the audience. The entire arena was instantly filled with a joyous atmosphere. Now, in the second stage of the mission, out of the 14 key items, 2 of the 3 army contracts have already been obtained by the participants. Let us see what kind of exciting performance the participants of Kitten Paradise have. In a live broadcast room, the Harkin looked at the old man's appearance with a smile. He waved his hand and turned the camera around. Suddenly, the dozens of split-screen cameras on the screen showed the amusement park covered in blood and wails. Amidst the melodies of the children's songs from the loudspeakers in the amusement park, the participants who intended to regain their qualifications to participate in the competition continued to rush into the various projects. Unfortunately, there were many people who rushed in, but less than 10% of them were able to rush out. And those who were able to kill the host and inherit the progress of the mission were even rarer. The seemingly warm amusement park had now become a meat grinder, swallowing blood and death, continuously bringing more joy to the audience and the host. On the big screen of the amusement park, the top 5 projects of the mission completion progress had already been displayed. The one in the lead was the Level 3 sublimator from the Gurkha lineage, Delavea, who was hosting the Death roller coaster. Behind him, the sublimator from Siam, Chalk, was hot on his heels. There were already 80 to 90 failed challengers on both sides, and the rise was astonishing. Unexpectedly, these projects turned out to be of medium or slightly lower difficulty in evaluation. And for the projects with the highest difficulty, because there were too few challengers, it was difficult to accumulate any completion rate in a short period of time. This made the hosts, who were greedy for safety, regret. At the same time, just as Dieting was introducing, the image on the big screen suddenly changed. The Death Roller Coaster project, which was originally at the forefront, suddenly shook, and the name of the host changed instantly. From the original Delavea, it changed to India. In a close-up on the big screen, the scene of the host being instantly beheaded by the challenger was broadcasted. Right next to the corpse was a man wearing a red turban on his head, with a long black beard and a scimitar in his hand. He was a Sikh warrior. Before the audience had time to marvel, the big screen changed again in an instant. The progress of a project that was originally outside the rankings suddenly soared. After breaking into the range of the top 3, it surpassed the original second and first place and occupied the top spot. Huge World, host, Amber in the Dark. Chapter 2:25. Huge World, host, Seeing Amber. All of a sudden, all the representatives on the VIP seats turned around in shock and looked at the representative of the looming hall. Their expressions were filled with surprise and admiration. They thought that the looming hall had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. They had actually taken the initiative in the battle for the last army contract. Damn it, I'm not. Why do you have to push all the blame to us? My husband was so angry that his face turned red. He opened his mouth several times to speak, but in the end, he closed his mouth bitterly. He knew that no one would listen to him, even if he explained. Who would believe that a Chinese from Seeing Amber would go to the Social Security Bureau? Dirty linen should not be aired in public. It would be more embarrassing if he said it, so it was better not to say it. Look at the old man of Looming Hall. He is so happy. You quickly send 2 bottles of quick-acting heart pills over. The Harkin kindly instructed as it scrutinized the battle footage that was sent over from the director's room. Then it clicked its tongue and sighed. The battle is indeed in full swing. Even the host who is in the lead may die in the hands of the challengers. What do you think, Madame Baizet? As he said, he gave a look to Baizet, who was quietly eating snacks next to him, indicating to her, "If you dare to say that again, I will kill myself in front of you." Seeing the camera move over, Baizet hurriedly wiped the potato chip crumbs from the corner of her mouth and chewed the snacks in her mouth. She looked confused. "What are you asking?" Ting held back a mouthful of old blood and squeezed out a smile. "May I ask our live guest, Ms. Baizet, what do you think of the current Kitten Paradise competition?" He emphasized the word live guest, indicating to her to stop eating and come to work quickly. "Don't let me talk awkwardly alone." The distracted guest finally reacted. She lowered her head and looked at the screen. She nodded seriously. "It's pretty good. Friendship comes first, competition comes second." As soon as the voice fell, the contestants' blood sprayed all over the screen and couldn't be wiped off. Friendship was no longer. Baizet coughed and said solemnly, "I think the situation is very delicate. You look like this is going to win, but in fact, it is not necessarily so. But if you want to say who can win, in fact, he is unlikely to have a chance." Right from the start, she directly said more than 10 points. She analyzed from the beginning to the end, as if she could still analyze from the back to the end. But the problem was, after saying so much, there wasn't a single solid point. The smile on the Harkin's face was about to disappear as it quickly sent a message to the outside. "Brother, can you quickly change the guest for me?" Very soon, Xian Niao's reply arrived. "We don't have enough manpower. Besides, isn't this pretty good?" "Damn, it's pretty good." The Harkin was on the verge of breaking down. "In short, I think," Baizet thought for a moment and finally concluded, "the lucky one will definitely win." "Isn't this exactly the same as what you said yesterday? You can say that you're lucky, but can't you use another word?" Cough, cough. The Harkin finally asked the question that he had been regretting for the past 3 hours. For example, Baizet lowered his head and looked at the list of contestants in front of him. His eyes lit up. "I think he's not bad." He reached out and pointed at Huaishur. "Exactly the same as yesterday." The Harkin felt like it was about to go mad. "Sister, are you a shill hired by the Astronomy Society? But yesterday, It was indeed, as Byzayat said. Huaishir had actually managed to obtain the dark gold-grade equipment in the midst of a fierce competition. The Harkin couldn't refute that. Instead, he looked down, and his face twitched uncontrollably. It had been almost an hour since the start of the event. Ghost Castle, Huaishir. The final completion rate was a pitiful 3. In other words, this guy hasn't even finished off the first wave of challengers after so long. Isn't this a little too much? Or could it be that he's just slacking off? But since Byzayat said so, come, let's see what the outstanding performance of Huaishir from yesterday will be like today. He waved his hand and gestured for the director's room to turn the camera around. Unfortunately, a head popped out from the director's room and began to shoot him meaningful glances. The Harkin looked up and glared at him. Just turn around when I tell you to. Do you think I'll be scared? All right. Since you've already made up your mind, the assistant director sighed and told the cameraman to listen to his instructions. Therefore, in an instant, the scene on the big screen changed. Before they could see clearly what was happening, they heard a burst of impassioned music. Hey, Yeoman! On the special seats, eldest cousin directly spat out a mouthful of water. F***CK. It can't be. Old Luo even taught you this? Then, the colorful laser light that blinded the eyes of all the audience burst out from the darkness. Following the screams and cheers of the zombies, for clouds of gray fog slowly rose. Following the rhythm of dong, chow, 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 more than a dozen naked zombies wearing only gym clothes jumped out of the smoke. Their bodies were smeared with oil from who knows where, showing off their muscles, chest hair, and big bellies. They moved their bodies to the music, singing and dancing, and sang in unison. Young men. There's Nanito feel down. Hey, young man, you don't have to be depressed. There's a place you can go. When you are poor, you can live there. You will find that you will be incomparably happy. It's Funto Stay Athwai. MC. Why? M.C. A. Along with the loud music, more than a dozen zombies either did backflips, stretched their hips, or twisted their bodies randomly, singing and dancing around Director Choi, who was already foaming at the mouth. An indescribable aura of stupidity and a strange atmosphere that made all the viewers' hair stand on end mixed together. Through the big screen, all the viewers were hit in the face. D-Ting was stunned in place. What the hell is this? What's going on? How did you do it? The 3 questions of life suddenly squeezed into the mind, and then turned into countless black question marks rising from the forehead. In the end, it became a question from a heart. Brother, where did you learn the ability to sing and dance without saying a word? Are you a spy sent by the Dongxia pedigree or the Indian pedigree? In this indescribable mental pollution, only Chui Zaiqing's desperate cries could be heard. The representative of the 7 Stars group in the special seats had a livid face and joined the incompetent and furious team. He glared at the husband who was trembling and eating the heart-relieving pill. The looming house has gone too far. Lao Qing's body swayed and almost fainted on the spot. He was so angry that he was about to cry. I didn't. This person is not from our looming hall. That sad and indignant look made the representative of the 7 Stars group stunned and couldn't help but believe a little. Could it be that they really didn't do it? And in this crazy live broadcast, all the viewers saw the gate of the castle open again, and a group of ferocious ascendants rushed in with long guns and short cannons. Don't be afraid, Go. The leader encouraged his teammates. It's just an evil spirit. Hiss. As soon as he looked up, he saw dozens of dancing demonic shadows, and Shui Zaiqing, who was hanging in the air, screaming in pain in the smoke. In the wonderful melody of the dynamic Huaishir playing online, the zombies twisted their bodies happily, and the flowers and plants on top of their heads kept throwing green non-calorie and low-calorie health drinks around. It looked very environmentally friendly. In an instant, everyone was stunned on the spot, not knowing what was going on. They only felt the aura of the powerhouses coming at them like raging waves, as if it was crushing everything and obliterating the Tao, so they didn't dare to move anymore. And in their team, there was a burly man with naked chest hair who suddenly blushed and had a nosebleed on his face. Oh my God, the evil spirit castle is so exciting. Go, go. Seeing that another contestant had fallen into the hands of this Ingzhou lunatic, Chui Ziqing screamed in despair. "They're all perverts here, Run." Just as he screamed in despair, more than a dozen zombies wriggled strangely, singing and dancing around him. "Hey, young man, how happy it is to stay in YMCA. How happy it is." He was only stunned for a moment, and then, under an instinctive sense of crisis, the leader of the Ascendants put away his originally confident look, cupped his hands, and retreated. "Sorry to disturb, goodbye." They turned around and left. But with a loud bang, the gate of the castle behind the challenger closed. "How dare you?" Huai Shi, who was a guest DJ, raised his head and stared at the new challengers. "You want to leave after offending our looming hall?" Who was the one who shouted a charge just now? He raised his axe and shouted angrily in Ingzhou language. "If you don't want to charge, then don't you want our looming hall's face? Damn it, you still don't admit it." In the venue, the representative of the Seven Stars group was furious again. He glared at the old man next to him, as if he wanted to kill him. "You Ingzhou people are too shameless. You're already so perverted, and you still dare to say that you don't know martial arts." In a daze, the old man didn't say anything. He just swallowed a mouthful of blood into his stomach with the quick-acting heart-relieving pill. "Fine, whatever you say." He was already disheartened. At the same time, in this endless torture, Chui Ziqing closed his eyes in despair. He finally gave up thinking and was swallowed by the endless ashes and plagues. Soon, he joined the singing and dancing that was brimming with happiness and idiocy. Ghost Castle, Huai Shi. Progress 8. Immediately afterward, under the numb gaze of countless audiences, the progress of the Ghost Castle began to soar rapidly. 12, 16, 20. After digesting the first wave of challengers, the number of zombies under Huai Shi's command began to skyrocket. However, limited by the Ghost Castle itself, there could only be at most 4 challengers at a time. It couldn't be like a death roller coaster where 70 or 80 challengers came in at once. The progress of the mission itself was still slow, until Huai Shi thought for a while, calmly analyzed, and then he let a challenger out. Leaning against the door, he watched the Ascendant, who finally cleared the level after being bitten by zombies, walk away. Huai Shi began to rub his little hands in anticipation. Half an hour later, the plague from the abyss spread from the square of the Kitten Paradise. Chapter 226. F***CK The Talent. F***CK The Unpolished Jade. F***CK The Cat Litter Shovel. In the stench of countless mosquitoes and flies, Yuan Zhao struggled to use the grass to shovel out an indescribable object the size of a coal ball from the mountain of cat litter. He pinched his nose and threw it into the cart behind him. He was sweating profusely, just like an old farmer who worked in the fields. His face was ashen. Smelly, really smelly. It was going to stink him to death. Did that bastard really think he was a cat just because he wore a doll? Not only did he poop so much, he even pooped such a big one. This was not a pile of cat litter. It was a poisonous mountain. Even a rat as big as a calf was poisoned to death in this damn place. Fortunately, that damn thing at least had some conscience and issued this matter as a task. Unlike other hosts, as long as Yuan Zhao worked hard to shovel this pile of cat litter before sunset, his task would be completed. It took some hard work, but there was no danger. He could get the task reward if he worked hard. The teenager spat, poked the fork into the things on the cart, grabbed the handle, and pushed the third cart of cat litter to the coffee shop operated by the Kitten Paradise. He didn't want to know what the coffee shop used to make coffee at all. When passing by the square, he lowered his head deeply and wished he could cover his face. In the curious eyes of the challengers, he just wanted to find a hole to hide in. At this time, if an acquaintance of the Social Security Bureau jumped out and asked, "Hey, Yuan Zhao, what are you doing?" Yuan Zhao would be able to welcome social death right away. Fortunately, the team of the Social Security Bureau was not very familiar with him, and not many people died. In this big hell, no one knew that he was shoveling cat litter in humiliation except for Huai Shi. Later, as long as he shut up Huai Shi, that pretty boy, he could firmly bury this dark history. Just like this pile of cat litter, it disappeared into the unknown darkness. Thinking of Huaishir, that guy who was ridiculously lucky, his heart began to ache. He accidentally inhaled a mouthful of stench when he sighed. Suddenly, his vision turned dark, and he almost fainted from the stench. Before he could react, he had already accidentally bumped into the person in front of him. I'm sorry, Yuan Zhao subconsciously apologized. Soon after, he saw that there was such a wide path in front of him. Yet that person insisted on walking in front of him. His expression immediately became unhappy. How do you walk? Why don't you look ahead? That person was straightforward and didn't argue. After being hit by the cart, he immediately lay on the ground and vomited large mouthfuls of blood. Convulsing violently, he stared blankly, not understanding what had happened. It was as if he was drunk, and when he finally looked at Yuan Zhao, his expression became angry. It's you. He raised his hand with great difficulty and pointed at Yuan Zhao. Why, you bumped into me? No, I'm not. Yuan Zhao jumped up in fright, subconsciously grabbing the manure fork and pointing it at the already bloodless, ferocious face. Don't blackmail me. As he spoke, he looked at the people around him in a panic and grabbed a passerby who was passing by. You have to be my witness. I just touched him and he fell. Bang. The passerby he reached out to grab also fell to the ground with a thud. Then, like dominoes, the passers-by fell to the ground one after another in the huge square. For a moment, the sound of falling bodies could be heard incessantly. Almost all of them looked the same, not knowing what had happened to them. After falling to the ground, they began to vomit blood and convulse violently. Those who were slightly weaker stopped moving after a few flops, losing their temperature on the spot. Because they had already lost their qualifications to participate, they did not even drop a single gold coin. Yuan Zhao was about to go crazy. I'm just shoveling cat litter. There's no reward for killing me. So why are there so many people trying to blackmail me? The passers-by who were lucky enough to survive quickly cried out in alarm, attracting the attention of the people around them. There were also those with strong constitutions who did not die on the spot, but when they came to their senses, they cast their cold gazes at Yuan Zhao. After seeing the stinky cart beside him, they came to a realization. Everyone be careful. There's poison in the feces. Fierce expressions appeared on their faces, and a few of the ascendants who were hit rushed forward. Kill this little bastard. Don't come over. Yuan Zhao cried out in alarm. He subconsciously raised the manure fork and stabbed forward. Indeed, it was as he said. A cold light appeared first, followed by a foul stench. The manure fork stained with cat litter was incomparably sharp. With just one stab, it pierced through a ascendant who looked strong on the outside but was weak on the inside. He immediately stopped moving. Dead? Yuan Zhao stared blankly, and then doubts arose in his heart. Shouldn't a dead ascendant turn into light and disappear? Why would a corpse be left behind? Soon he knew why. On the fork, the ascendant who should have been dead suddenly raised his face. His bloodless face was ferocious, and only hunger was left. His sharp nails scratched at Yuan Zhao's face, futilely pulling at it in the air, wanting to be gluttonous. Around Yuan Zhao, the dozen or so ascendants who had fallen to the ground had all climbed up. Their white eyes looked around, and their hungry gazes were cast on the living people in the square. By the time Yuan Zhao reacted, he found himself surrounded by zombies. In a brief moment of silence, Yuan Zhao swallowed his saliva. Can you not hit my face? In the next moment, he was drowned by the tide of zombies. Only Bai Zhe calmly pointed at the ranking list and said, Look, I told you he was very lucky. At this time, in the amusement park, Huaishir was happy for a while, but he immediately found that the number above his head didn't move. It was stuck at 207, and there wasn't an increase in people for the next few minutes. That's strange. Is the disease too severe, and the infection didn't catch up? Huaishir compared the strategy guide of Plague Incorporated on his phone, and he didn't understand what was going on. Then, he found that the number of zombies under the jurisdiction of the Ghost Castle began to rapidly decrease. And in an instant, there were only 50 zombies left outside. What's going on? You've crossed the line, kid. Kitten in a puppet costume appeared in front of him, and she reached out a hand from her big mouth, flicked the ash, and then retracted it. Just now, the host of the project was infected by your virus and died. Although I don't mind your performance being higher, I'm not the only administrator here. Be careful not to provoke those unreasonable little asterisk cheese, and they'll kill you on the spot. There's nothing I can do. Okay, so it's a version update, and the plague halo was removed. Huaisher sighed. You patched it too fast. How am I going to increase my performance next? If this loophole wasn't patched, I'm afraid the one looking for you now wouldn't be me. Kitten glanced at the center of the square behind him, at the castle shrouded in dark clouds. A few cold eyes were cast from the castle in the center of the square, and coldly fell here, with a hair-raising cruelty and ferocity. Then they disappeared without a trace in front of the tattered kitten puppet costume. Just treat it as a change of request. Kitten said, I'm not asking you to draw me a colorful black, but if you're too reckless, I can't protect you. Give me some face, how about it? Okay. Huaisher nodded. He naturally knew that he couldn't go against the boss, but his eyes blinked at Kitten, waiting for her to continue. Courtesy demands reciprocity. I've already given you so much face. Big brother, you have to do something, right? Then it's settled. Kitten threw out the cigarette, but from her mouth, and stepped on it. As long as you die in Ghost Mansion, it'll be counted as your performance. You don't have to worry about other things. Thus, after this matter was settled, she didn't say anything more and left. Huaisher didn't even see how she disappeared. After a short pause, the second place that wasn't too far behind began to catch up, and the number of performance began to rise rapidly. He really didn't know what that woman Hoopa was doing. The speed was incredibly fast. In an instant, Huaisher's first place became precarious. Looking at the ranking on the system panel, Huaisher's mind raced. What Kitten meant before she left was, only those who died in Ghost Mansion would be counted as his performance, right? He pinched the stubble on his chin and slowly raised his eyebrows. I can't release poison outside, but if I let the zombies outside drag the challengers in and kill them, that can't be considered a violation of the rules, right? Chapter 227. 10 minutes later, a blinding iron signboard appeared in the live broadcast and hung outside the ghost castle. Then, a second signboard, a third signboard, and a fourth signboard were hung up. Sexy zombie hot dance. Absolute thrill with no exit. Various health drinks free lucky draw. Are you lonely? Do you need someone to accompany you in this lonely hell? Asia's largest zombie chat center is online. Red, blue, and yellow lights constantly alternated on the signboard, like a free light show. In an instant, they flashed crazily in the passionate singing, which was very eye-catching. Then, there were the words, Ghost Nightclub, that radiated with grand light. At the end, there's also a billboard that was bigger than the signboard, for fear that people would not be able to see it clearly. Ingzhou Looming Hall operates with integrity. In order to make so many signboards, Huaisher spent a lot of effort. Fortunately, these lamps were all made of metal, and he could do the rest with his mediocre alchemy skills. But he never thought that the lousy skill, illegal organization operation that he learned when he first read the record would come in handy here. Even if it was only level 4 or 5, with Huaisher's contemplation at this moment, countless wonderful inspirations kept emerging in his mind. In just half an hour, the entire gloomy and terrifying castle turned into a disco at the entrance of the village. With the preparation completed, Huaisher snapped his fingers, and countless zombies rushed out like wild dogs out of their cages, pouncing on the challengers who were standing outside and watching in shock. They hugged their arms enthusiastically, rubbing their arms with their lush chest hair, and squeezing out a sincere smile on their rotten and swollen faces. Big brother, come and play. New store opening. All services, all fractures. Fierce male dancers, crazy for your songs. They caught a person and pounced on him without any explanation. 2 zombies held down the hands, and 2 zombies held down the legs. They were dragged into the castle and stuffed into the lively and noisy hall. Under the passionate singing and dancing of the zombies and the warm hospitality of countless strains, There were no more challengers after 5 minutes. For a time, the stagnant performance quota began to rise rapidly again, causing the girl wearing the Prajna ghost mask in the huge world to raise her head in astonishment and then roar angrily. Then, he made another note in the little notebook in his heart. Snatching my head, snatching my performance. This grudge is absolutely irreconcilable. Sooner or later, I will help you correct your mistakes. Kupo's daughter must be furious. Looking at the rapid increase in turnover, Huaisher tilted her head back and took a sip of the ice-cold, happy water. She was immersed in the joy of increasing sales. Sure enough, a horse wouldn't get fat without a windfall, and a man wouldn't get rich without grass at night. As long as this illegal organization was up and running, its performance began to rise. Not only the performance, even the proficiency of the skill illegal organization operation began to skyrocket. In an instant, it increased by 2 levels and reached level 6. If this happened in the present, who knows how many years he would be sentenced to. He felt happier when he thought that he was in hell and there was no SIR to send him warmth. Hell's a good place. After drinking the happy water, he was stunned for a moment. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. When he secretly opened the Book of Destiny, he discovered that there were 3 additional buffs on his form on the title page. Wisdom and meditation. Due to certain reasons, your ability to make strategies and plans according to the situation has improved a little. Success in every endeavor. Due to certain reasons, your plan won't encounter too many obstacles. Happiness and suffering together. Due to certain reasons, your luck will improve, but the severity of failure will also increase. I'm shocked. What the hell is this? Huaisher was so scared that he jumped up. Also, what was the certain reasons? These 3 powerful buffs fell from the sky and scared him a little. It was simply inexplicable. It couldn't be that someone tapped on the screen and said that he was lucky and his luck improved, right? What the hell? Just by looking at the description, he knew that with these 3 buffs, even an African would be able to become a European king. When he saw that the duration of each buff was 20 minutes, his first reaction was to take out his phone, open the game, and start to draw cards crazily. Then he felt that he was blind. He threw all the stones that he had accumulated over the past few days. 3 10 points in a row, but there wasn't even a guaranteed 4-star. And in the pool where the lowest was 3-star, he actually drew a few 2-stars. Could you believe it? Soon, under the lesson of blood, he finally realized what the buff of happiness and suffering together meant. Indeed, his luck would improve a little, but once he made a mistake, the severity of the consequences would also increase substantially. Even if Huaisher's luck improved, it still didn't reach the 1% 5-star rate announced in the game. After it was judged as a failure, the system tacitly gave him a lot of 2-stars. Okay. Huaisher put down his phone. It seemed that the meaning of these buffs wasn't to let him be reckless, but to play it safe. If he was calm in the face of danger, he would be able to counter it. If he did things steadily, he would naturally be successful. If he remained cautious, he wouldn't lose everything. Huaisher didn't expect that he would be taught a lesson by these buffs one day. Thanks to the effect of these 3 powerful buffs, his solicitation operation was incredibly smooth. Those who were afraid of difficult challenges and didn't dare to fail were passionately dragged and kidnapped by the zombies and sent in one by one. Those who were weaker were directly served in the nightclub. Those who were stronger and wanted to resist were killed by Huaisher's axe. It was daunting, but not dangerous. The performance had soared to 800 points in just half an hour. According to the momentum of this growth, it would be extremely difficult for the people behind to catch up. The first place was secured. Then, he heard screams coming from outside the castle. In the heavy footsteps of the zombies, another unlucky person was dragged in. Even if his hands and feet were already held down, that guy was still screaming in a crying voice. His voice was frighteningly loud. I didn't hit him. I really didn't hit him. The unlucky person struggled with all his might and screamed, I shoveled Kitten's feces. I made contributions to the amusement park. You can't do this to me. I want to see Kitten. Let me go. I want to see Kitten. The zombies next to him were still comforting him. Little brother, don't be afraid. As long as you've danced with us, we'll be good friend for life. Don't panic. It'll be over once you finish counting the stains on the wall. The more Huaisher listened, the more familiar the screams sounded. He took a closer look with a flashlight, but when he saw Yuan Zhao's pale face, he was stunned. Why is it you? Yuan Zhao saw that it was him and immediately became angry. I wanted to say, it must be you. In his rage, Xiao Gui struggled with all his might. Even the zombies who were rank 3 ascendant couldn't hold him down and shouted angrily, "You even want to kill your big brother? You traitor!" I'm shocked. Huaisher was stunned. I'm older than you, okay? Since when did you become my big brother? Moreover, you dare to be my big brother. Aren't you afraid that I'll jinx you to death? Sometimes he felt that he was a jinx to all kinds of good brothers. If it wasn't for old Lu's tough life, he would have been jinxed to death in the church in Laotang Town. Hearing him say this, Yuan Zhao became even angrier. You actually didn't refute the words of a traitor. Young man, you're just inexperienced, making a fuss about nothing. So what if I'm a traitor? I've been a professional traitor since 400 years ago. I don't need you to tell me. Huaisher cursed in his heart, shook his head, and sighed. He waved his hand to signal the zombies to put him down, then casually handed over his feces fork. Forget it. Since you're here, help me. Help? Yuan Zhao was at a loss. He glanced at the spinning laser ball behind him and the old zombie who was twisting and turning on the stage with a steel pipe between his legs. He suddenly understood something and became furious. What kind of person do you think I am? Huaisher was already stunned by his strange way of thinking. He could only sigh and point behind the door. You just stand here, holding your feces fork. If there's a cough, if there's a challenger, just jump up and stab him. Yuan Zhao realized that he misunderstood. He was embarrassed, but also a little uneasy. What about the feces? You're still thinking about your feces at this time. Huaisher shook his head and snapped his fingers. Suddenly, 4 big zombies wearing little clothes jumped out from the group of zombies. They were Chui, Piao, and Enli. You, and you. Go shovel the feces. Finish it before sunset. After the 4 zombies nodded their heads, they danced to the music and left, leaving a dumbfounded Yuan Zhao standing in the same place. Could be like this. Out of Huaisher's expectation, from the time they entered Yamatai City until now, the number of contestants who died in this city and lost their qualifications to participate in the competition should be close to 3,000 or even 4,000. Other than fighting each other, there were even more people who died in the city at night because of a single misstep. In just one day and one night, at least half of the contestants were gone. If this was the preliminary selection, it was understandable. Even if the number of contestants was huge, but compared to the 7,000 contestants, it was just 1 out of 2. This lineup was probably not even the preliminary round. It was just a greeting and they were eliminated. It was no wonder that they were thrown into the kitten paradise as a test for the host. At the same time, it could also give those unlucky challengers a chance to make a comeback. But with such a huge number of contestants, even if they came in batches, the entire kitten paradise was already overcrowded. Even if they knew that it was dangerous ahead, there was already a long queue in front of the 10 or so less difficult projects. There were even more people who did not dare to challenge the stage in exchange for the right to be revived and did not have the ability to kill the host to inherit the progress of the strategy. They could only wander around the plaza, hesitating and stopping. It seemed that they had given up on their own. There were even those who did not even need the zombies to catch them. They ran in to indulge themselves. After drinking the special calamity ash happy water that Huaisher gave them, the bitter wine went down their throats and their hearts ached. They died in the midst of the singing and dancing. For a moment, Huaisher was simply in awe. However, Huaisher still had a trick up her sleeve. Once the ascended people were turned into zombies, all that was left of them was an empty shell. However, the shell still retained some of the memories of when they entered the city. Why did they die? Where did they die? Where did they see something incredible? They were all asked by Huaisher and recorded in the Book of Destiny. In an instant, the map of Yamatai City was faintly about to be completed by him. And just at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, When the performance competition was in full swing, he suddenly heard an ominous thunder coming from outside the castle. Then, an endless amount of dark substance erupted like a volcano. In the rumbling sound of the wheels rolling forward, a few tyrannical laughter covered the entire kitten paradise. Thus, the tragic ravaging began. Chapter 228. Too slow, too slow. Amidst the tyrannical laughter, an unfamiliar hoarse voice exploded like thunder. Then another voice sneered, "Allowing outsiders like you to set foot on this paradise is truly absurd. Since we have to clean it up no matter what, why don't we do it? No matter what, you're just a bunch of trash." As the gate of the pitch-black castle in the middle of the square opened with a bang, a pitch-black carriage rolled out from within and rushed straight into the crowd. Under the iron hooves of the black warhorse, countless blood spurted out. It was as if a juicer had started to work, continuously spurting out scarlet juice. On top of the carriage, along with the shrill laughter, several illusory shadows flew down and floated in the air, choosing to devour people. Wherever they passed, all the challengers were left lying on the ground. Even the host who was hiding in the event was violently pulled into the air as a shadow flew past and casually thrown down, turning into a pile of mush. Fleischer peeked out one eye from the back window of the ghost castle in astonishment, but he was stunned on the spot. Those several translucent shadows were wrapped in solid darkness and bathed in blood. They were clearly carrying swords and crowns, looking as dignified and handsome as princes, but at this moment, they were as ferocious as demons. They casually rampaged through the crowd, brutally slaughtering, turning the ascendants into corpses on the ground. Even if they wanted to escape, under that strange speed, they still couldn't avoid it. One of the princes was dressed in gray, his face pale, driving the carriage back and forth in the crowd. Another prince had 8 dwarves around him, laughing while bathed in blood. One stepped on a pair of pitch-black crystal boots, trampling everything in front of him into mud. One had fish gills behind his ears and bulging eyes, like a strange fish swallowing the ascendant's whole. One prince had black hair and black eyes, his muscles bulging, waving a sword in his hand to take people's lives. Another prince had long hair like a snake, choosing to devour people. Finally, there was one who waved a raging fire, turning everything in his path into charcoal. In the blink of an eye, the ascendants on the square suffered tragic casualties. Those who wanted to counterattack found that all their attacks landed on empty air passing through their bodies. The ferocious monster approached step by step, ravaging those who resisted to death in endless despair. However, the slaughter was still ongoing. It was getting more and more intense. In the blink of an eye, the amusement park turned into a real hell. Then, a tattered puppet appeared in front of the carriage. The kitten raised its head. Its patched face was dirty, but through its open mouth, it was difficult to see the figure hiding inside. Only a cold voice could be heard from inside. "I work during the day, and these are my guests." He said, "If you have any ideas, you can implement them through the agents you've hired instead of doing it yourself." The kitten said, "You guys broke the rules." The gray-clothed prince who was driving the carriage was stunned for a moment. He frowned and lowered his head to look at the tattered doll in front of him. As if he had heard a joke, he suddenly grinned and let out a hoarse laugh. "Rules!" A whip lashed down from the carriage, leaving a whip mark on the kitten's leather sheath. In the flying dust and stains, the originally cute face was split into 2 by the scorch mark, and smoke rose from the scar. Immediately after, the prince with the dwarf stretched out his hand and lifted the kitten up. As if pulling at the kitten's neck, the prince grinned and told him word by word, "We are the rules." The black-haired prince who returned from the bloody battle held a sword and laughed sharply. He looked around, as if he was bragging about his bravery in front of thousands of people, and happily announced, "We are the popularity. Look, isn't this the audience who came to watch us? Isn't this the performance we're offering?" But there was no audience here, only countless corpses lying quietly in the blood. The kitten didn't say anything, just waved its hand. Then, the mighty bell sounded from the depths of the amusement park. In an instant, The darkness shook and rolled back. As if time was flowing backward, an invisible force swept out from the castle in the center of the square, pulling the princes who were in the midst of killing, pulling them to the gate, letting them go back to where they should go. This again? The face of the gray-clothed prince who was driving the carriage was distorted. Why don't you obediently go back to your own garbage dump like you? With anger and unwillingness, he turned the carriage around and turned to the castle. But before leaving, he paused and suddenly turned back to ask, "By the way, I haven't seen your duck friend for a long time. Where'd he go?" The kitten didn't say anything, but another prince sneered and said, "I remember there was a dog-headed man before, and his wife." "Ha ha ha," added another, and all the princes laughed merrily and set out on their way home with pride and joy, casting malicious glances at him from the corners of their eyes. "Don't worry," someone bent down and whispered in his ear, "one day you will be like them, and one day this place will belong to us." The gate of the castle closed with a loud bang. In the dead silence, the kitten didn't say anything, only remained silent, lowering his head to look at the reflection in the blood. It was as if he could see, countless years ago, the beautiful world under the blazing sun, countless smiling and joyful faces, countless happy expressions, and countless gentle dreams. Unfortunately, those things were no longer there. So the quiet pool of blood rippled under the trampling. The illusion of the past was gone. Only in the darkness under the doll cover, there was a cold sneer. "Look, my friends, in the past, we were so happy and carefree." The sudden massacre had basically wiped out more than half of the challengers in the square. But they were already used to the strange changes in Yamatai City. The Ascendants didn't take this matter to heart, only treating it as a test that would happen. The competition was still going on. It was even more intense than the competition in the morning. The battles were constantly on display. Even the losers who were originally loafing in the square and unwilling to challenge after the bloodbath were afraid that they would be mowed down again if they delayed. Before the last chance, they were all working extremely hard. When the day was over, there were actually more than 400 ascendants who had successfully cleared the amusement park, fighting for the right to return to the competition in the revival round, and were able to walk out of the amusement park. And there were a total of 11 hosts who were killed by the Ascendants who challenged the stage, snatching the progress of the challenge. They didn't even have the chance to participate in the revival round, directly leaving with hatred. When the camera of the organizing committee had just finished broadcasting the bloody battle in Akihabara, it finally turned back to check the rankings of the competition. All the audience who had already predicted it and entered the state of idling saw Huai Shi's name at the top of the list. Ghost Castle, Huai Shi, 1,077 people. And Li Jianhu, who was originally chasing closely, was still far behind in the progress after slashing his hands until they were numb. He was only 701 people in second place. And the sick warrior who was originally in third place was squeezed to fourth place by another ascendant who had killed the host and inherited the progress. No one expected that at the last moment, the ascendant who had been hiding for the whole day would suddenly burst out, using a well-designed backstab to kill the original host in front of the light of dawn. As the last ascendant left the stage, the gates of the amusement park closed with a bang. The kitten paradise was closed. But for the hosts, the real highlight of the show had just begun. Why did they persist for the whole day? Could it be that they came to Yingzhou to work for free? What a joke! People die for wealth and birds die for food. The people here weren't red scars who took pleasure in helping others. Wasn't the reason why they worked so hard? Wasn't it for the reward of completing the mission? There was no need for the ascendants to urge them. Except for the top three, all the hosts who had completed the mission had a light floating in front of them, directly entering the hands of the hosts. Everyone had one, and even Yuan Zhao had one. But Yuan Zhao looked at the dung fork in his hand that was emitting a golden light, and his whole body began to feel uncomfortable. That's it. He was dumbfounded as he squeezed the fork in his hand. I shoveled your shit for the whole day, and you just gave me your dung fork? The kitten just raised its hand and waved, and the dung fork in Yuan Zhao's hand shook violently. Then the rust and stains on it quickly peeled off, and in the end, a solemn outline of a trident appeared. And as Yuan Zhao waved it, there was a faint hurricane wrapped around it, doubling its speed. Yuan Zhao's sacred mark was originally the second stage of the Pegasus, and speed was its strongest point. With the help of this hurricane, its speed increased again. Under a full thrust, even Huaisher couldn't see it clearly. And the hurricane could also turn into an invisible sharp blade. As long as it was injected with origin substance, it could be shot out from the trident at any time. It could still penetrate the bluestone on the ground from dozens of meters away and chisel a deep hole in the soil. Feeling its power, how could Yuan Zhao not know that he had picked up a big bargain? This was definitely an A rank or above border relic. It was a precious weapon that was hard to buy in the present world. It was more than 100,000 times better than the pure white weapon he was originally good at using. With his gun in hand, he could even fight a third-rank expert. But even though this border relic was powerful, there was one thing that wasn't good about it. The hurricane it raised always had a fishy smell that wouldn't disperse. After smelling it for a long time, it would make people's vision black and their legs weak. Moreover, it couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. Yuan Zhao's heart twitched. How was he going to take this gun out in the future? Even if he wasn't afraid of people saying that Yuan Zhao was here again, was he going to wear a nose plug in a fight? But this was his problem. Young people always had worries, especially Yuan Zhao. He had even more worries. Huaisher smiled and patted the dog's head. Then, following the kitten's signal, he followed him into the building. Next was the time for the top 3 to draw their prizes. And that was the end of the live broadcast. In front of the screen, the Harkin calmly drank a mouthful of tea. Then he thought worriedly, if that little brat Yuan Zhao knew that the scene of him pooping feces was broadcasted all over the world, and that someone had even edited it at the speed of light and uploaded it with a lot of views, he couldn't even think about it anymore. It was simply a tragedy, and in order to prevent that brat from taking things too hard and hanging himself in front of his house, he should tell his subordinates not to tell him, right? But when Yuan Zhao found out that he was the world-famous pooping young man, what kind of expression would he have? I'm really looking forward to it. Chapter 229. Oh my God. Although he had entered the building, Huaisher still had to wait in the corridor outside the door for a while. There were 2 people in front of him. The second place, Hu Pe, and the last ascender from Persia. The first person to enter was the Persian. Soon he walked out with light steps, nodded slightly to the 2 people, and left. Hu Pe, who had been staring at Huaisher for a long time, also snorted coldly, got up, and walked into the room. This time it took a long time. About half an hour later, Hu Pe pushed the door open and came out, carrying a sword pouch that had never been there before. It was unknown what kind of weapon was inside. He pointed at the door behind him to Huaisher and said expressionlessly, "It's your turn, first place. I haven't studied well since I was young. It's embarrassing for you to praise me like this." Huaisher scratched his head and walked into the room with a happy smile. But when they brushed past each other, she could feel Amber's gaze faintly glancing at the base of her neck. Why does this girl only think about helping people behead people every day? Or is the advanced education of the Social Security Bureau not enough? I'll mention it to Big Cousin later. He walked into the room and closed the door. He sat on the chair. Kitten was still sitting behind his desk, smoking a cigarette. One of his arms stretched out from the mouth of the doll cover and flicked the ash. When he saw Huaisher come in, he didn't hurry to speak. He just smoked silently, as if he was thinking about something. Huaisher didn't say anything. He just sat on the chair and waited for him to speak first. "To be honest, you did a good job. It was like an art. You didn't let me down." After a long time, Kitten said, "The performance of those scumbags hosts combined wasn't as high as yours. When they wake up tomorrow, they'll be embarrassed, right?" Huaisher nodded modestly. "It's all because you taught me well." Business flattery was a necessary part of social communication. People flattering each other wouldn't lose anything, and it could even improve their mood. Why not? Kitten just smiled and didn't say anything. She reached out and opened the drawer next to her. Huaisher's eyes widened. The highlight of the show was here. Then, The kitten took out 3 things from the drawer and put them on the table. There was a dusty ring, an envelope, and a thin iron chain that looked quite old. The 3 items were nothing special. According to what you said, the task has been completed, and this is the reward you deserve. Although there were some accidents that no one wanted to see, this did not affect the final result. You are the first, and I will take out 3 of the best collections of kitten paradise over the years for you to choose from. The kitten said, "You can do whatever you want, but I won't explain anything to you. No matter what you choose, these 3 items have the same value to you." 1 out of 3? Fleischer was stunned. He couldn't help but move closer and look down at the things on the table. One was a gray iron ring. The other was an envelope that could be seen everywhere. It was thin, as if there was some kind of card in it, and the last one was a very ordinary-looking thin iron chain. There was no dazzling light, nor was there any magical scene. It was like a product that was sold at a discount in a second-hand shop. Fleischer raised his head in surprise. "Big brother, you really don't want to give me a hint?" Kitten didn't say anything. She just shrugged and calmly looked at his conflicted expression. Fleischer reached out and touched the ring. In an instant, he felt the origin substance in his body boil and surge. He withdrew his finger and touched the envelope. This time, the Book of Destiny faintly transmitted some kind of fluctuation. Finally, he touched the iron piece and found that his soul ability, the Hand of Confinement, had activated on its own and responded to it from a distance. Now, he could conclude that these 3 items were definitely not ordinary goods. The ring was very compatible with his origin substance. The envelope had a certain response to the Book of Destiny, and the thin iron chain directly responded to his soul ability. This feeling was very strange. When he picked up any one of the items, the power represented by the other 2 items would come with a sense of emptiness. Kitten told him that choosing any one of them would be worth it, but now Fleischer felt that choosing any one of them would cause him to lose 2 equally precious opportunities. He sank into a long period of thought, making a difficult choice. His expression changed, touching this, touching that, thinking that he could only choose one. His heart was about to break. In the long period of choosing, he hesitated and hesitated. After almost using up all of his determination in this life, he gritted his teeth and picked up the ring on the far left. He made up his mind. Immediately after, a familiar voice sounded in his ear. It sighed with disappointment. "Idiot, where did your I want them all attitude go?" Fleischer was stunned. "Crow, you followed me in?" He opened his eyes wide in astonishment. I didn't. I'm still home. Don't talk nonsense." On the page of the Book of Destiny, lines of words appeared. "If it weren't for the fact that you're being teased so miserably, Big Sister wouldn't even be bothered to say anything. Be careful. Even if there is a system panel, this isn't a game. This guy definitely followed me in quietly, right?" Fleischer thought suspiciously, but no matter how he probed, Crow didn't reply. He slowly raised his head, pressed the ring, and looked at Kitten in front of him. He frowned. "Are these 3 items really the original reward for first place?" Kitten seemed puzzled. "Why do you say that? If one item is compatible with me, it could be said to be a coincidence. But 3 items are useful to me at the same time. This can't be explained by coincidence, right? Maybe it's because I have a rich collection." Kitten laughed softly. "What? Are the rewards I gave you not to your liking? I took out 2 extra items for you to choose from." Fleischer was silent. "What do you want?" "You already know what I want. But what are you going to get from me?" Fleischer asked bluntly. "You already know what I want, but what are you going to get from me? If I'm not wrong, your position is already equivalent to the leader of a large group, right? In the world of Deep Level 4, you can stir up trouble and do whatever you want. What do you need from an outsider like me?" "It's very simple, Fleischer. As long as you are willing, I can give you these 3 things," he said. "As long as you are willing to accept another task from me." Fleischer was silent for a long time and asked, what task? As long as he could do it, he intended to fight for it. These 3 things were too important to him. He didn't have much room to refuse. "I need someone to help me clean up," Kitten said bluntly. "Don't be afraid. Thanks to your friend, the cat litter has been shoveled. I mean the entire kitten paradise. Don't you think it's a little crowded? Maybe it's a good thing to make it more spacious. Huaisher was stunned for a moment. After a moment of silence, he had a flash of inspiration. He was shocked. He stared at the darkness under the doll cover in front of him in disbelief. You want me to help you kill those princes? Kitten didn't refute, didn't explain, and didn't correct him. He just looked at him quietly, waiting for his reply. I can't do it. Huaisher shook his head and refused. Didn't he see those princes? Even if he didn't know their true strength, he knew that he couldn't fight against them just by looking at their tyrannical appearance and the strength they displayed. Maybe a level 4 sublimator could solve it, but it was definitely not something he could fight against. Don't worry. Since I have chosen you, I have full confidence in you. Little Cat calmly said, in the current Yamatai city, it can be said that only you can complete this mission. Why? Kitten suddenly laughed softly and looked at Huaisher. I wasn't sure at first, but now it seems. You're a celestial genealogy, right? Huaisher was silent. He lowered his head and looked at the envelope on the table. He raised his eyebrows slightly. So, this reward was used to test him? Celestial genealogy sublimators have one advantage. They generally have the ability to adapt to the abyss. Other than the sublimator part, they can basically be regarded as half an abyss creature. Kitten slowly explained. And you are especially special. You could be regarded as half an abyss creature. The reason why the Ghost Castle recognizes you is because of this. So, as long as you have my authorization, you can freely enter most of the places in Kitten Paradise. You can complete things that other sublimators can't. This is the first point. The second point, of course, it's because you can fight. Kitten said matter-of-factly. Looking at your murderous and perverted appearance, I know that you are the talent I need. If you solidify in the future, you will definitely be an incredible demon from hell. Letting you do things, I'm relieved. Huaisher's face was tangled. He didn't know how to explain. He could only ask, anything else? This is the third most important point. I can't do it myself because there is an unspoken rule in this amusement park. Only princes can defeat princes. Do you understand? Kitten sighed. I can kill them, but they will be reborn from their lounge the next day, just like they can't kill me. Only when they're defeated by other princes will their popularity be taken away, and they will be removed from this amusement park. What the hell? Huaisher was stunned. Only princes can defeat princes? Then you should go and find princes. Why are you looking for me? Do I look like the kind of rich second generation whose parents are powerful and influential? That's too shallow. Is it enough for the so-called prince to have a piece of land at home? Kitten sneered, looked at him carefully, and suddenly asked, Do you have long magic hair? Huaisher was stunned and subconsciously pressed the ponytail behind his head. The long hair of a mountain ghost. It couldn't be cut. Was this considered long magic hair? Kitten asked again, Do you have magic hands? He lowered his head and looked at his hands. The hand of restraint, was it considered magic? Kitten nodded and then continued to ask, Can small animals talk to you? There was a crow that secretly called me just now. Does that count? Have you been poisoned? Thinking about it carefully, it was a common occurrence. Was he poisoned all over now? Cursed? Kidnapped? Enslaved? Kitten asked a series of questions. What the hell was that? Huaisher seemed to be able to answer every question. Huaisher was speechless. Finally, the most important thing, Kitten asked solemnly. Does everyone think that every time your trouble is solved, it is because of the appearance of a beautiful young lady? Huaisher was already stunned. It seemed that everything was right. Therefore, Kitten laughed, clapped her hands, pointed at his face, and exclaimed in surprise, Oh my God, you are a prince. Chapter 230. Half an hour later, Huaisher pushed open the door and walked into an abandoned theater. Below the stage, two sublimators who were waiting there raised their eyes. They were not surprised to see him coming in. Instead, they seemed to have expected it. Li Jianhu asked directly, You agreed to? Yeah, the same as you. Huaisher found a clean seat and sat down without saying anything. Now it seemed that Kitten did not place all her hopes on him. Other than Huaisher, he had already prepared a plan B in advance. If he guessed correctly, Li Jianhu and the young Persian man agreed earlier than him. However, there were advantages to having 3 people. At least, he did not have to go into the tiger's den alone. Not to mention the Persian sublimator. He could rest assured with Li Jianhu's skills. Originally, he planned to pull Yuan Zhao, the poor child, to do evil with him. But now, it seemed that it was better to let him sleep with his precious manure fork. Huaishir and Li Jianhu were old friends who had snatched kills and achievements. Not to mention, they were both from the orchard gym. Among the big 4, they could be considered as classmates and partners. Naturally, they knew each other well. After nodding, he looked at the Persian man not far away. How should I address you? Ansali. Just call me Ansali. Although his face was full of stubble, his voice did not sound old. It was just that he was dressed maturely and had a burly body, which made people misunderstand his age. He was an uncle in his 30s. After introducing himself, Ansali just raised his wrist and showed the pendant hanging from his bracelet, the spreading eagle and the old man's badge. Huaishir was stunned for a moment and immediately understood his origin. It was indeed the Persian pedigree. No, strictly speaking, it should be the Zoroastrian pedigree. Although it could not be compared to the huge pedigrees, such as Xia and Rome, it was still a huge pedigree with a deep foundation. According to Huaishir's knowledge, there were a total of 5 sublimation routes in the pedigree, including 2 sects and 3 boundaries. A few hundred years ago, they even had a natural enemy. They could be said to have a deep foundation. Needless to say, the great mystic ritual, thus spake Zarathustra, that shrouded the entire realm was built by the creators using part of the Zoroastrian genealogy as the cornerstone. However, after experiencing a great change, the Persian lineage rarely showed itself in public. Most of the members hid in the borders of the lineage, and they rarely showed themselves. They were like the legendary hidden sects, with all kinds of sacred marks and powers that were quite mysterious. In any case, they were companions who were going to do the dirty work together. Everyone exchanged information with each other and secretly weighed the weight in their hearts. They all felt that each other's ideas were prickly and not easy to deal with. Therefore, they all smiled amiably on their faces. After getting familiar with each other, Little Cat walked in from outside the door. Standing on the stage, she lowered her head and looked at her hired thugs. In a few hours, it will be the darkest time of the night at Yamatai. Are you all ready? After getting a reply from the 3, Kit nodded. He dragged his leather bag and sat down on a dirty stool on the stage and lit a cigarette. According to the original rules, I am in charge during the day and they are in charge at night. But today, they broke the rules and went out during the day, so they have to go back to the lounge to sleep at midnight. As long as you are careful, there won't be any trouble. As he said that, he gave a few pieces of paper to them. The specific plan is here. When the time comes, Huaishir will be in charge. Inside, Hupo and Ansali will assist from the side. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask directly. If there is anything you're not willing to do, you can also express it directly here. It will save you the trouble of waking up those guys and getting killed by a slap. Kitten's plan was simple. Once the time was up, he would use his authority to send them directly to the castle where the princes were sleeping. Everyone would quietly enter the village and not shoot. First, they would secretly take care of the few leaders who were hired by the princes. Then, Huaishir would follow Kitten's method and take care of the sleeping princes one by one. Then it would be done. It was easy to say, but it wasn't hard to do. Everyone had known each other for many years and knew each other well. Kitten hardened his heart and decided to be a traitor. Not only did he print out a map of the castle for each of them, he even gave each of them a few keys. He even taught them the weaknesses and lifelines of the princes. But Huaishir still didn't understand why Kitten had so much confidence in him. After seeing the might of the princes during the day, he didn't think he could match up to them. Even if he broke through the heavens, he was only a level 2 sublimator. Moreover, it hadn't even been 2 months since he advanced. Even with Hupa and Ansali's help, if he was exposed, he would only be sending himself to the doorstep. Today is different from the past. Times have changed, little brat. Kitten smoked his cigarette and said calmly, "No matter how noble we used to be, now we are just lonely ghosts relying on this paradise to survive. After losing our original faces, we can only exist in hell with such an ugly appearance. Is such a thing worth being afraid of? To some extent, we are all part of the mechanism of kitten paradise, drowned people relying on this broken boat to survive. It's just that they have been lost for too long, forgotten too much, and fallen too quickly. If they die in your hands, it might be a kind of release for them." Huaisher wanted to say something, but stopped. "In fact, if I die in their hands, I should be quite relieved. At least I can guarantee a faster death." "Don't worry," Kitten said. "To outsiders, what the princes can embody is naturally a kind of great power that the entire kitten paradise has. But internally, this power may not be of much use. Before tomorrow, you are still the employees of kitten paradise, and you can be somewhat immune to their suppression." At this point, Kitten took a deep look at Huaisher, and some words were not said in public. Huaisher understood tacitly. He was a celestial genealogy, which was equivalent to having an abyss account. For the mechanism of kitten paradise, it was naturally different from other ascenders. This was the good thing about being on the same side. They were all working, but he had a formal establishment, and others could only be contract workers for labor dispatch. Even at the end of the year, his share was much bigger than the others. If you cannot wake them up and let them die peacefully in their dreams, then everything will be over. If there is a flaw in the plan, you don't have to worry too much. Kitten said, "When you officially reveal your qualifications to challenge them, it will be a decisive battle of popularity between the princes. The paradise will never interfere with such an internal cycle and replacement, and will only be happy to see it. At that time, if they want to kill you, they can only rely on their own existing strength. Some of them are strong, and some are weak, and it depends on your luck at that time." "Okay," Huaisher sighed. Wealth was found in danger, and there was no point in talking about danger now. Anyway, if he failed, Kitten would not gain anything. It was said that 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. No matter how he thought about it, he could not beat the 7 princes together. They were all grasshoppers on the same rope, so it was better not to scheme against each other. Seeing that Huaisher had made up his mind, Kitten was quite satisfied. He just flicked the ash of the cigarette, and Huaisher felt that there was one more thing in his pocket, and there was a hallucinatory whisper in his ear. "I'll give you this first. It's a deposit." Huaisher reached out with his hand, only to discover that the thin chain that had fallen into his pocket was actually the thin chain. Before he could react, the thin chain disintegrated on its own as soon as it came into contact with Huaisher's origin substance, turning into a strand of origin substance that burrowed into Huaisher's soul. Huaisher's body involuntarily trembled, and the chair he was sitting on let out a sharp sound. Pupa and Ansali looked over and found that Huaisher hadn't moved at all. They just assumed that he had changed his posture, but immediately afterwards, they saw 2 intense rays of light shoot out from his eyes. It was as if 200-watt light bulbs had been installed behind his eyeballs. Shiny. That was the terrifying light that would be emitted when countless origin substances collided. Under Huaisher's jacket, the stigmata mountain ghost awakened on its own without him needing to activate it. A pale white flame lit up from the crack in his chest, just like lava. That was the alchemy fire in the cauldron. At the center of the flames was the appearance of the thin iron chain. It was like a pendant. After Huaisher touched the thin iron chain, he realized that it had the same effect as his confinement hand. It had been transformed from pure origin substance through some method. Its completion rate was 10 times, no, 100 times higher than his own. Once it was no longer suppressed by the kitten, it was awakened by the sole power of the same origin. The iron chain seemed to come alive as it pounced into Huaisher's soul, revealing its original appearance. It rapidly expanded. Within the illusory consciousness, a vertical chain appeared. The top and bottom of the chain couldn't be seen, as if it had already extended to the end that his consciousness could sense. As the chain continued to expand, countless intricate structures formed from pure origin substance began to appear in front of Huaisher. With just a slight movement, The countless links of the chain began to grind against each other, emitting earth-shattering sounds of thunder. Sparks flew in all directions like lightning. Immediately afterwards, it finally found something that resonated with itself, and it began to shrink. All of the abnormalities disappeared without a trace. It was as if two powerful currents had merged into one, and it merged into Huaishi's soul without any resistance, becoming a part of his confinement hand. Merged into the sorrowful rope, Huaishi ignored the stunned expressions of the other two. He reached out with his hand, and the sorrowful rope shot out from his fingertips. However, it was no longer made from iron threads. Instead, it had transformed into a chain shrouded in faint black smoke. Sparks constantly shot out from the chain's fingertips. Metal clashed against metal, but no ear-piercing sounds could be heard. It was as if even sound had been suppressed by the chain. Huaishi's eyes widened in disbelief. The origin substance that he had split off had actually become a genuine border relic. Chapter 231. The transformation happened in an instant, and Huaishi didn't even have time to react. Perhaps it was because the chains were intrinsically compatible with the sorrowful rope. Originally, one was made of metal, while the other was made of origin substance. Now, it was as if her soul had finally found a physical body. The two of them combined into one, and Huaishi had never imagined such a thing would happen. This feeling was as if a part of himself had become a relic from a border. Now, as long as he pointed at a target, the iron chain would fly out on its own and transform between reality and illusion, forcefully connecting the two objects into one. If Huaishi injected origin substance into it, it would even have the effect of suppressing the sacred mark. This equipment was practically tailor-made for him. It could be said that this was the only one, and Huaishi felt that it wasn't a loss. As if he had just obtained a new toy, Huaishi couldn't wait to try it out. The sorrowful rope transformed in the air as if it was his own arm. One moment, it would bind a tortoise shell. Another moment, it would bind a chestnut rope. By the time he reacted, Hoopa was already looking at him with disdain, as if he was looking at something dirty. However, Insali's eyebrows were raised, his expression one of surprise and admiration. He secretly gave Huaishi a thumbs up, as if saying, "Little brother, you're pretty good too." Huaishi coughed awkwardly and put away the chain, pretending that nothing had happened. Only when time slowly passed did Kitten finally raise his head. "Are you ready?" he said. "You should head out now." Bang! It was as if a bubble had burst. As Kitten waved his hand, Huaishi's vision suddenly blurred. In the next moment, he had already fallen from the sky and was in midair in the castle's main hall. He didn't have time to scream. He forcefully turned around in midair and looked around, dumbfounded. What the hell was Kitten thinking? This was completely falling into a wolf's den. At this moment, there were a total of 11 ascendants in the castle's main hall. He had still underestimated how stingy the princes were. They weren't even willing to give their subordinates a single room to stay in, and actually made them sleep on the floor in the castle's main hall. The muffled sound of something breaking through the air suddenly rang out. The dozen or so ascendants raised their heads in confusion. Immediately after, they saw 3 people falling from the sky. Before they could react, Ansari, who was at the back, strangely paused in the air. His robe swelled up, and he floated up like a balloon. In the air, he raised one hand and held an old oil lamp. He reached out and rubbed it, and a wisp of dark smoke emerged from it. The more the wisp of darkness went down, the more it expanded, as if it was boiling. It spread violently and instantly enveloped the entire hall. Wherever it passed, not only light, but even sound was instantly devoured. Strangely, however, it was as if nothing had happened in the darkness. Even the origin substance fluctuations of the 11 ascendants didn't change in the slightest. Huaishi saw it clearly, and the corners of his eyes twitched. A stigmata relic. It was definitely a Persian stigmata relic. According to his guess, the stigmata relic was probably a weapon formed by one of the ranks of the evil sect's path of sublimation. The moment it appeared, endless darkness spewed out from the oil lamp, turning this place into a dark kingdom at the end of the beginning era, completely isolating the inside from the outside. No wonder Kitten wanted him to be her assistant. This ability to turn off the light and beat people up in an instant was too convenient. In an instant, Huaisher landed on the ground. Immediately after, in the deathly silence of the darkness, a crisp cracking sound could be heard from Huaisher's hand. As he turned around, it was pressed against the forehead of a sublime who was sitting on the ground sharpening a blade. The trigger was pulled. A ray of fierce light, accompanied by red iron sand, spewed out from the barrel of the gun. But immediately after, it was swallowed by the darkness, like a fleeting epiphyllum. Blood splattered. Huaisher stepped forward, pulled the bolt again, and aimed at the source of the wind beside him. He pulled the trigger again, and in the midst of the violent tremor, another ray of iron spewed out. Immediately, a wisp of warmth fell on Huaisher's face. In an instant, 2 of them were killed. In the end, the ascendants recruited by the princes were not incompetent in the face of the enemy's attack. They did not give Huaisher time to calmly reload. An iron hammer had already smashed down with lightning. Even the darkness spat out by the oil lamp could not be covered by the loud noise. A sizzling sound could be heard faintly breaking through the darkness. Through the thick darkness, a ray of lightning could be faintly seen, but it was already piercing to the eyes. If one was really hit by this thing, they would probably turn into ashes in an instant. Huaisher raised his hand, and the chain of sorrow was instantly thrown out. It caught on the ceiling and pulled him up into the air. The moment he flew past the dull thunder, the chain loosened from the ceiling and rolled back toward the iron hammer. The iron hammer was bound by layers of darkness, and the lightning quickly dissipated, swallowed, and worn down. In the end, the iron hammer fell silently to the ground, no longer having a trace of magic. Immediately after, in the midst of countless sparks, the iron chain contracted, and the heavy sorrow that was like a burial was placed in the chest of the attacker. It suddenly erupted. Caught off guard, the attacker only felt his eyes turn red. He did not know what sorrowful past he thought of, but he actually let out a long sigh, and 2 streams of tears flowed down. Huaisher brushed past him. Thus his tears and sorrow flew into the air together and fell to the ground together with his head. This way of dying sounded extremely artistic, and it was enviable. Huaisher hurried forward, distinguishing the footsteps and the sound of the wind around him. But the darkness swallowed everything, and he could not even find any signs to distinguish between friend and foe, until Huaisher waved his hand, and a grass seed halo of fear and halo of pestilence spread out in all directions. In midair, Ensali seemed to have sensed something and raised his eyebrows slightly. Ignoring the strong corrosiveness of the darkness, the mountain ghost's sacred mark expanded forcefully like grass roots growing under a rock. It actually opened up a gap in Ensali's lamp of darkness. Immediately after, a stunned face appeared in front of Huaisher. Huaisher raised his gun and pulled the trigger. A corpse was sent flying backward. A trace of hidden killing intent suddenly appeared behind him, and a blurry figure suddenly emerged from the darkness. In midair, she swung her long saber horizontally and aimed it at Huaisher's neck. Tisk, in Huaisher's hand, the spear of compassion was raised and blocked the blade. The drummers burst out with force, and the vibration was transmitted up the spear blade and down the long saber to the attacker's fingertips. Tell her, big sister, I'm on your side. In the darkness, the slender and thin figure disappeared silently, leaving behind an illusory tisk sound. Huaisher sighed helplessly and then withdrew the gun pointed at her. It was a pity. In any case, nothing could be seen in the darkness. It was normal to accidentally kill someone, right? He pulled the trigger and killed the sublimata next to him, who had started hacking randomly after he couldn't see anything. Then he hung the shotgun on his back, swung the axe, and did a jump chop, and then another jump chop. It could only be said that it was a pity that he could only store 4 large-caliber bullets at a time. Then he felt a hurricane coming from behind him. The Dark Kingdom was in turmoil. With the outbreak of the hurricane, violent explosions occurred one after another. Blazing light emerged from the depths of the Dark Kingdom, tearing the darkness apart layer by layer. In the light, the sublimator suddenly rose into the air like a burning flame. As he sensed that his companions were dying one by one, even a fool knew that something was wrong. Someone had come to steal their home. The most important thing was not to wipe out the enemy, but to send out the alarm as soon as possible. After hardening his heart, he completely gave up on rescuing his companions. A giant wolf with dazzling light all over its body broke through the darkness. It suddenly retracted its origin substance and opened its mouth to roar. Something was wrong. Huaishi's eyes widened. A chain with sparks and black smoke had already flown out and bound the wolf's mouth. It suddenly contracted and forcibly closed the giant wolf's open mouth. Immediately after, Ridgy and Amber suddenly appeared in midair, as if he had appeared in a flash. The two long blades in his hands were covered in frost and flames as he slashed downwards. In an instant, 16 crisscrossing saber lights gathered in one place. Blazing blood spurted out. The Dark Kingdom surged and once again swallowed him. Huaishi raised his axe and suddenly chopped down. The wolf's head fell to the ground. The sacred mark that appeared collapsed. Even the sublimator's body suddenly shook. Blood spurted out from all the pores on its body. Huaishi's other hand pierced through it. Then, it turned into a white light and dissipated. Jin Shao Bian fell to the ground. Soon, the Dark Kingdom dissipated. The ground was a mess. The few people looked at each other and let out a long breath. The lingering fear had not disappeared. They were just a little bit away from sounding the alarm. As Ansali rubbed the oil lamp again, a plume of black smoke flew out from the oil lamp and turned into several figures that scattered around. They were still emitting the energy waves of the ascendants, as if nothing had happened. The origin substance needed to maintain the sacred mark relic was obviously not cheap. After taking 2 breaths, he took out a small snuff bottle from his pocket and carefully picked out a fingernail-sized portion. After fiercely rubbing it twice, he came back to his senses and his face became rosy. This kind of medicine that could restore origin substance mostly stimulated the brain. The side effects were not shallow. The 1,000-year incense that could really restore origin substance was priceless. 1 mouthful was enough to completely restore a 4th-order sublimator. Using it on sublimators below the 4th order was a complete waste. After recovering a little, he rubbed the oil lamp again. Soon, a wisp of smoke wrapped around their bodies and covered them. Whether it was the sound of footsteps or any other abnormalities, they were all covered up. Judge Jean, you guys split it among yourselves. I don't need it. He took the initiative to say, but we need to hurry up. I can't hold on for too long. Huaishi and Ridgy and Amber looked at each other and found that the other had an I want it all expression. They could only curl their lips and split it 50-50. This woman was covered in border relics. She was already so rich, but she still wanted to fight with him over these bits and pieces. Sure enough, the richer you are, the stingier you are after splitting the loot. It was time to get to work. Huaishi took out the key and walked in front. Chapter 232. The interior of the castle was much more spacious than it looked from the outside. Even with Kitten's map, Huaishi almost got lost. It was like an illegal building, tangled and complicated and heavily locked. Everywhere was covered in dust, and whether it was the picture frames on the walls or the sculptures, they had all been weathered and peeled off, their original appearance impossible to see. There seemed to be some kind of shadow wandering in the darkness, but if one looked closely, they wouldn't be able to find any traces. The remnants of origin substance that had been left behind until now had soaked into the darkness, forming the outlines and reflections of the past. Even though time was limited, Huaishi still explored cautiously, afraid that he would go the wrong way. According to Kitten, this castle could be said to be the hub of the entire theme park, and there were more than a few princes hidden inside. If he went the wrong way, he might provoke a monster even more terrifying than the princes. What was even more frightening was that after leaving the hall and entering the depths of the castle, the system panel disappeared. This place was already outside the range of the Shinue framework. In other words, the effects of the false life had already disappeared. If he died here, he wouldn't be able to leisurely revive outside the arena. Instead, he would be buried here forever, accompanying the withered bones of the past. If things went wrong, he might not even be able to die. No wonder those 10 or so ascendants weren't willing to live inside, preferring to sleep in the hall. If they weren't careful, they would end up with a fate of never being reincarnated. No one would be willing to. The deeper they went, the more unsightly Amber and Ansali's expressions became. This place was truly the depths of hell, so thick that it made it difficult for people to breathe. It was dense in the air, constantly eroding their consciousness. If they didn't have a structure like a soul to preserve their consciousness, they would probably be frozen in an instant, forever becoming a corrosive object in this hell. Relying on the double protection of their stigmata and soul, they were as careful as if they were wearing spacesuits in space. On the other hand, Huaishi's footsteps were light, his expression calm, and he would occasionally take a deep breath, as if you're on a spring outing. Amber and Ansali exchanged glances with each other. This guy might have already been corroded. Why don't I just give him a quick death? No. No matter what, he's still a teammate. You shouldn't stab your teammate in the back if you can, right? Teammate? I don't have a teammate who steals my kills. But if you kill him, won't you have to deal with the prince? My Rigian family has been a minister for generations. Why can't I be called a prince? Although his heart was itching, in the end, Hoopa didn't do anything that would make the people happy. He just followed behind Huaishi with his 2 long swords, until Huaishi suddenly stopped in his tracks and raised his hand to signal the people behind him to be alert. He was just a few more steps away from the door to the lounge, but suddenly, an inexplicable premonition of death emerged in his heart, piercing his forehead with a chill. There's something wrong with the door in front. He turned his head, took out a quill from the elephant branch, and wrote a line of words for them to read. Which of you has a way of looking at the door? Amber innocently removed his hand from the hilt of his sword and looked at Ansali. Ansali nodded and rubbed the oil lamp again. A streak of colorful black light peeked out from the opening of the lamp, but it shrunk back awkwardly and changed to another one. A wisp of gray fog silently flowed out from the opening of the lamp. Even when Huaishi got closer and squinted his eyes to look carefully, he couldn't see it clearly. Under Ansali's control, the wisp of gray fog became fainter and fainter until it completely disappeared into the air. Only something between existence and non-existence slowly flew in the direction of the door. Along with the cold wind, it slowly seeped behind the door. Immediately after, Ansali's hand trembled, and his face turned pale. He almost couldn't stand still. Huaishi and Hoopa were stunned. They widened their eyes and waited for him to say what he saw. However, Ansali grabbed their hands and pressed them on his oil lamp. In an instant, the scene behind the door appeared in front of Huaishi's eyes. It was like a spider's nest. Countless dried black heads crisscrossed from the narrow corridor, like kelp floating in water. They constantly wriggled slightly, turning into countless poisonous snakes that chose to bite people. They completely occupied the entire corridor, and behind the countless dried hairs, there was a skinny figure sitting upright at the door of the lounge, like an air-dried corpse without any moisture. He didn't look as handsome as he did during the day, but instead revealed the ferocious appearance of a skeleton. Draped in tattered clothes, the dried and broken prince guarded the door of the lounge. His eyes were lowered, and 2 shriveled eyeballs in his dark eye sockets were unfocused. Only the aura of the abyss that rose from his body tyrannically ravaged the surrounding space, causing the air to distort and become like a lens. Huaishi let go of his hand and looked behind the door in astonishment. Damn, didn't they say they were all asleep? Why was there still someone keeping watch at night? What the hell should he do? Hoopa took out a map and gestured to Huaishi. Are there any other passageways? Ventilation ducts and sewers are also fine. Huaishi shook his head. It wasn't that there weren't any other passageways, but every passageway was marked with a sign of absolute danger. Kitten had already reminded him several times. Absolutely, absolutely do not take a passageway marked with a dangerous sign, or else you'll have to bear the consequences. What should he do? The few of them exchanged glances, and in the end, they could only make a firm decision. Nothing. If there was someone keeping watch at night, it would prove that the current princes were indeed, as Kitten had said. They had fallen into a weakened state because they had violated the rules, and the others were most likely in a deep sleep. As long as they got rid of the lone prince guarding outside the door, the rest would be easy. But how could they get rid of him? Once they started fighting, there would definitely be a lot of noise. No matter how deeply asleep the long-haired prince was, he only needed to use a strand of his hair to slap him twice to wake him up. Get rid of him in an instant. And Sally rubbed the oil lamp, forming a line of words in the air. She stared at the two people in front of her. Do you have any ideas? Hoopa shook her head. Even if the Rigian family had been Chinese for generations, she was still a woman. Although she had a killer move, it might not be useful against a prince. Huaishur hesitated for a moment, nodded, and wrote another line of words. I have a move that might work, but it needs a casting time. And Sally was a Persian. She was stunned for a long time before she understood what he meant by this analogy. She immediately asked again, how long? At least 5 seconds. Huaishur sighed and answered. 5 seconds. Where was the Roman time? Sometimes, a duel would be over in 1 second. 5 seconds? 5 seconds was enough for the opponent to kill him dozens of times. The corpses piled together might even be enough to get a VIP membership card for the crematorium in the south of the city. The corner of Ansali's mouth twitched, and she looked hesitant. After a long time, she sighed. The smoke changed. 3 seconds. He said, I can't take any longer. Can you go faster? Huaishur shook his head. He couldn't guarantee success in 3 seconds. If he made a mistake, everyone would be killed. If he rashly gambled, he would only lose more. No matter how good his equipment was, it wasn't as precious as his life. It wouldn't be embarrassing to admit defeat and turn back now. Hoopa suddenly raised her hand and gestured helplessly. Leave the rest to me. She continued to gesture. 2 seconds, I can do it. Huaishur looked at the two of them and hesitated for a long time. In the end, he nodded slowly. If he took a gamble, he could turn a bicycle into a motorcycle. Who wouldn't want to change their motorcycle into a Land Rover? After making up his mind, he looked up and said, Are you ready? If you are, I'll start the fight. After receiving a confirmation, Huaishur turned around, reached out, and pressed against the door. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Amidst the low voice and the countless strands of hair that had been startled awake, Huaishur took a step forward and stood still. He stared at the withered face that had suddenly lifted up from the countless strands of hair and stroked a handful of hair. He smiled. Boss, do you need service? Huaishur raised his hand, and a chain that emitted sparks flew out of thin air. In an instant, all of the dancing strands of hair were tangled together, and in the end, the chain wrapped around the prince's body. Immediately afterwards, a big man wearing a white robe and a headscarf jumped out from behind him. He raised the oil lamp in his hand towards the prince. Multicolored black smoke poured out from it, wildly extracting Ansali's origin substance. In the end, a massive figure appeared from the smoke of the oil lamp. The upper body was burly, with braided hair, and the lower body was completely a cloud of smoke. But his face was similar to Ansali's after he had a beard, relying on the power of the Dark Kingdom in the oil lamp as sustenance. Ansali actually directly used his soul as a carrier and manifested from the oil lamp. Then the divine mark awakened. Just above the smoke incarnation of a lamp spirit, the multicolored darkness suddenly stirred. With Ansali's movement, it suddenly pulled. As if pulling off a piece of clothing, the darkness was pulled down like a curtain, revealing pure light. With a wave of his hand, the curtain of darkness was thrown towards the long-haired prince. In an instant, it covered his face. Under the cover of the curtain, the darkness wriggled like a living creature, eroding through the mouth, nose, and every pore. In the inheritance of the Zoroastrian lineage, this world was the battlefield between the good gods and the evil gods, and the mortals were just the dust and residue bursting out under the collision of the divine power. Therefore, in the consciousness of mortals, there were natural elements of the 5 bright suns created by the Light King and the 5 kinds of demons in the Dark Kingdom. Now, with the help of the divine Mark relic and the power of the Dark Kingdom as a factor, Ensali forcibly stripped out the part of his soul related to the 5 kinds of demons. Therefore, he had the talents of embodiment, illumination, wisdom, insight, and so on. And in the darkness he peeled off, there was the essence of the 5 kinds of demons, namely stupidity, chaos, impure, destruction, and other pure curses. The ability to transform into a pure vacuum body and use the 5 kinds of demons as clothes could only be displayed at the 4th level. Now, even with the help of the divine Mark relic, it still couldn't last long, and it would also cause considerable damage to the soul. If it weren't for the strength of his 2 teammates, he would never take the risk to use this trick. Now, with the cover of darkness, there was no doubt that the place covered had turned into the Dark Kingdom. The prince's consciousness had been forced into a cage composed of fog, hellfire, febrile wind, venom, and darkness. Then, the cage began to shake rapidly. As the countless chains struggled madly, the cloak of darkness that covered the prince's body also trembled incessantly, collapsing and mending under the impact. Huaisha took a deep breath. 5, 4, 3. 3 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 233. 5, 4, 3. 3 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. The lamp spirit's face was already covered with cracks. As he suddenly stretched out his hand, the clothes of darkness returned and covered his body. Then, the light and darkness melted and returned to chaos. A broken shadow with layers of cracks suddenly shrank into the oil lamp. Ensali staggered back and sat on the ground. He was sweating profusely and his face was pale. As if the eternal darkness was torn apart, the prince opened his eyes again and angrily opened his mouth, as if he was about to roar. But then he saw the girl kneeling at the end of the corridor. He lowered his eyes. His fingers rested on the hilt of the sword at his waist, as if he was holding a willow, quiet and gentle. Facing his furious expression, Hoopa raised his face. In his dark eyes, the camouflage hidden in the darkness was torn apart, revealing a fierce outline. The long sleeve of the arm holding the hilt suddenly shook. It was as if a breeze had blown past. 2. At that moment, a clear voice resounded in the air. It was as if a bird on a willow branch rose with the wind and flapped its wings in the sky, blowing away the dark clouds and revealing the brilliant stars in the sky, and the wonderful outline of the moon. Drawing the sword, slashing, blood shaking, sheathing. It was a terrifying swordsmanship that was completed in an instant, beyond the limit of what the naked eye could see. Dozens of meters away, the cold light of the sword sprinkled down. So, on the prince's chest, the ancient clothes were torn apart, revealing the slash mark that suddenly appeared on his shriveled chest. From the slash mark, a ray of cold moonlight shone out silently. Unique sword, Yayoi Moon. The moonlight was like a nail, penetrating the body and bones, wedging the furious soul in the broken body, forcibly suppressing and sealing it. Hoopa had been exhausted on the ground. Sweat dripped from his cheeks and fell on his trembling fingers. Time continued to pass. 1. The moonlight collapsed. In the furious wind gushing out from the wound, the long-haired prince struggled violently, pulled out the broken moonlight, and crushed it between his 5 fingers. He opened his mouth, and behind his sharp teeth, a vicious breath was brewing in his dark mouth. 0. Huaisha took a step forward. While he was in a trance, Li Jian Hoopa froze for a moment and felt a wave of heat assaulting his face. It was as if an oven had passed by, but that was just an illusion. It was a feeling and threat that only existed in one's consciousness. It was a subtle feeling that could not be experienced physically. Something had awakened. From Huaisha's body, dark green flames rose from the youth's body, engulfing him within. In the gap between his chest, The light of purgatory lava silently surged, spiraling after a long period of brewing. The origin substance, which was filled with despair, pain, and madness, transformed into a tsunami and exploded forth. Huaishur took another step forward. Immediately after the effect of the unique sword ended, he leaned forward and bent down. Just like the etiquette taught by Kitten, he placed his hand on his chest and saluted. Under the witness of paradise, I challenge you to a duel. Suddenly, the space in the corridor stagnated. An illusory light descended out of thin air and froze everything. Then it stripped away all the interference of irrelevant people. Whether it was Li Jianhupa or Ansali's power, they were all blocked outside. Then Huaishur's shotgun, magazine, and a series of relics from the border, and even the power that did not belong to him were all stripped away. And on the prince's body, the armor under his clothes, the bracelet on his wrist, the boots on his feet, and even half of his iron skull suddenly disappeared without a trace. Only each of them was left, and the chain that bound the prince's body was constantly bursting with sparks. It was already a part of Huaishur's soul. The youth grinned. He raised his wrist and clenched the iron axe in the void. At that moment, the duel began. Oh no! Ansali's expression suddenly changed. He raised the oil lamp and used all his strength to release the Dark Kingdom. Through the Paradise's shield, it enveloped the entire corridor. Then, the roar of iron tore through the barrier and burst out from the Dark Kingdom. Iron was burning. It was as if the scorching sun had suddenly jumped out from the horizon of the Dark Kingdom, spreading its tyrannical brilliance in all directions. Huaishur stepped forward amidst the loud sound of breaking air. You step. After 3 steps, a hurricane swept up the broken floor tiles and flew up. The youth had already broken through the restraints of the gale. The burning mountain ghost was close at hand. He raised the invisible axe in his hand towards the prince in front of him. Slash! Ansali could not describe what he saw at that moment. It was as if a phantom had appeared from the youth's body and rose up. Huaishur broke free of all restraints. As he took a step forward, the spear with the brilliance of 400 years appeared in his hand, followed by the blade of sacrifice that swallowed blood. He clearly held it in his hand and slashed forward, sweeping across and piercing through. Was it a change in origin substance or a terrifying speed that was completed purely by the body? Or was it that even time overlapped at this moment? The burning mountain ghost was roaring from a moment that was so long that it was almost frozen. A moment passed in the blink of an eye. The youth and the prince brushed past each other. He staggered forward with the remaining power and knelt on the ground in a sorry state. Sweat poured out like water, and his arm cracked open with bloody wounds. Behind him, there were only 3 dazzling light traces left in the air. They pierced into the prince's body. The top-splitting axe, the waist-splitting chop, and the thoracic piercing finally erupted at this moment. The clanging sound of steel converged in one place, as if it had taken a physical form. Riding on pure destruction, it soared into the air and spread out in all directions. The Dark Kingdom trembled violently, as if boiling between the overlapping roars of steel. In the end, it weakly spat out a chord. So pure, so gentle, like the low aftertaste of a cello, it slowly dissipated in the air. The long-haired prince in the same place stared stiffly at the air in front of him. His lips were trembling, but he could not make a sound. In the end, it was as if he finally understood something. On the broken face, the corners of his mouth slowly curved up. Not only was it mockery, but it was also relief. As the chains dissipated, his countless long hair instantly withered. A cold wind blew. The body that had lost many years of life embraced the gift of time and silently collapsed into a pile of dust. In the dust, only a strand of golden hair was left. It was as bright as gold, gentle and beautiful. Mother, just a little bit more. In the deathly silence, only Huaishur, kneeling on one knee, gasped for breath with difficulty. He raised his hand and rubbed the silver blood medicine on his cracked arm. The numbness and itchiness of his flesh growing back covered the tearing pain. Ansali, who was leaning against the wall, waved his hand. The oil lamp flew out from his sleeve and silently came to Huaishi's head, tilting down. A wisp of pure gray-black fell down like water, sprinkling on Huaishi's shoulder. Pure negative origin substance poured into his body. Just like the blue bottle, it replenished the dryness of his soul and smoothly replenished the incomplete origin substance. He probably only dared to do this when he encountered a freak like this who could eat the poison and curses of the Dark Country's power like food. Otherwise, he would have killed him to silence him. When Huaishi's condition slightly recovered, he was completely out of strength. He weakly leaned against the doorframe and waved his hand at Huaishi, meaning that the rest was up to him. Hoopa thought for a moment, then very reluctantly took out a palm-sized gourd from his pocket. He walked in front of Huaishi, pried open her mouth, and poured a strand of the gourd into her mouth. It seemed to be wine. It was sweet and fragrant, carrying the fragrance of flowers and fruits. She only poured out a fifth of it before she painfully put the gourd back and put the stopper back. There wasn't much wine left in the gourd. As the wine slid down his throat, the thirst and pain in his body instantly dissipated. Instead, it became warm and comfortable, and his wounds quickly scabbed and closed. The physical strength that he had used up was completely recovered. Good stuff. Do you want another bite? Huaishi smacked his lips. I didn't taste it before. You're thinking too much. Hoopa glanced at him and put the small gourd into her arms. Her waist was still slim, and he couldn't see how she hid it. He was really curious about how many random things she had in her wide robe. Huaishi looked at her a few more times and found that Hoopo's eyes were looking at him with danger, so he quickly looked away. Of course, he knew why his teammate gave him such good stuff. After all, Huaishi was the only one who could do the rest. It was related to the success or failure of the mission, so no one wanted to fail. They only hoped that Huaishi wouldn't eat and drink for free without doing anything. Okay, leave the rest to me. Huaishi waved his hand, indicating that they didn't need to worry. He got up from the ground, patted the dust off his body, and checked the pile of random things that Kitten gave him one last time. After making sure that he didn't miss anything, he walked to the door of the lounge. He carefully pushed it open. In the silence, the door opened silently, revealing the deep abyss behind it. The materialized darkness silently rose and shrunk, as if it was breathing, cold and quiet. Only a gust of chilly wind blew over, causing one's hair to stand on end. No wonder they all looked so strange. It would be strange if they didn't fall asleep sleeping in a place like this every day. It was almost winter, but they didn't even install an air conditioner. TSK. Huaishi pursed his lips, stepped into it, and was swallowed by the darkness. It was like being swallowed into the stomach of a giant beast, distinguishing the composition of the newcomer and identifying whether or not it was an intruder. When the authority left by Kitten and Huaishi's own characteristics were verified, he silently appeared in an unfamiliar environment. In a dilapidated theater, Huaishi stood on the stage and looked around. It was exactly the same as Kitten's place. It was a ruin that had been in disrepair for a long time. Only on the high platform around the stage, the 7 huge seats still retained the luxury of the past. Except for the empty seat on the right that belonged to the long-haired prince, the other 6 seats had figures leaning on them, sleeping and defenseless. Only with the appearance of Huaishi under one of the chairs, a pair of blood-red eyes crawling in the dust slowly raised. A half-rotten thing that looked like a snake wrapped around the leg of the chair, snuggling up to the sleeping prince with black hair and black eyes, staring at him vigilantly. Shocked, Huaishi froze for a moment, and a chill ran down his spine. Why was there a dog inside? Kitten didn't say. Chapter 234. After being stunned for a short while, the snake looked at Huaishi with a dangerous gaze. But soon, it seemed to understand something. It looked back at its master, lowered its eyes tiredly, gently snuggled up to the prince who had accompanied it for a long time, and closed its eyes. Huaishi carefully took a step forward, but the snake did not respond. Even when he was close to it, it only raised its eyes to look at him coldly, and then looked away. It seemed to be tired. It fell into a deep sleep. Huaisher carefully rummaged through the things that Kitten gave him. Soon, he found a small box and opened it. Inside, there was a piece of gold foil cut into the shape of a flower. It was painted with a conspicuous peach blossom pattern and had a faint fragrance. Following Kitten's instructions, Huaisher held his breath, picked up the piece of gold foil, and gently placed it on the black-haired prince's forehead. As if time had reversed, quietly, the ferocious prince became handsome and slender. The corners of his mouth curved into a smile, as if he was dreaming of a beautiful dream. It dissipated into dust. The snake also disappeared without a trace. In the ashes, only a small dagger was left, full of ancient feeling. The second prince settled, but Huaisher's heart was not happy and fortunate. Instead, it was a little heavy. In the past, who knew how many years these princes should have been dazzling and handsome, right? With pure gentleness and kindness, they walked in the legends, but now they had declined to this extent. They couldn't even ask for relief. He continued to move forward and took out a small bottle from his pocket. The bottle was filled with an emerald green liquid, which exuded a sweet fragrance like apple juice. He quietly poured it on the lips of the next prince. As if moistened by the fragrance of the juice, the withered and decayed face became beautiful, and the red lips were bright. Then it turned into dust. The next one. When he passed by the long-haired prince, Huaisher thought for a moment, took out a small pair of scissors from his pocket, and put it together with the strand of golden hair in his position. Let these stay here as their memento. Then there was a warm heart-shaped ruby, like a heart full of love, with a certain person's name written on it. It was placed in the hands of the red-haired prince who used to wield fire. He collapsed into dust, and in the dust, there was an ice crystal-like gem and a red heart. Huaisher continued to move forward without stopping. He carefully followed Kitten's instructions and finished off the last few princes. When the last prince dissipated into dust, leaving behind a small sharp knife and a crystal that was as small as a bubble, Huaisher finally breathed a sigh of relief. He felt sweat dripping from his forehead. Mission complete. He sat down on a shabby stage, unable to get up for a long time. Only now did his hands begin to tremble, and a belated fear rose in his heart. Just now, he had almost died without leaving a corpse behind in hell. If any of the princes were to be awakened, the consequences would be unimaginable. After a long, long time, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He got up from the stage and walked towards the entrance of the theater. Then, he heard a voice behind him. "Are you leaving just like that?" Huaisher froze on the spot. He slowly turned his head. Then, she saw a young man standing on the stage for a long time. He was handsome and beautiful, with bright golden hair and a trace of a smile that made people uneasy. He wore a crown on his head that showed the inheritance of royal power and a sword at his waist. Another prince. Huaisher stared at him in astonishment. After a long time, he suddenly felt a little powerless. Where did the 4 heavenly kings come from? 8 out of 7 princes? Isn't this a little too against the rules? What? Is this unexpected? The unfamiliar prince asked with a smile. There was no anger or gloom in his expression, but instead it was bright and gentle. A little. Huaisher sighed. "May I ask which prince you are?" "I'm none of them." The prince slowly shook his head. "At best, I'm just the remnant of their last obsession. Even if you leave me alone, I may not be able to exist until tomorrow morning." Huaisher looked at him in confusion and frowned. "You don't seem angry?" "Why should I be angry?" the prince asked rhetorically. "Didn't they get rid of it in the end? That's enough. Instead of continuing to live on, it's better to meet the end with dignity. No matter how cruel and crazy they have become now, they used to be kind and gentle people. Even if they don't deserve sympathy, at least they have the backbone of a prince, right?" Huaisher was speechless. "Thank you very much for helping us get rid of the ugly appearance we have now. Please allow me to express my sincere gratitude to you." With that, the prince put his hand on his chest and bowed. Huaisher didn't know how to answer. Should he say that you're welcome? Or should he say that he's sorry for your loss? It didn't seem right. Then you should thank me. I'll take my leave first." Huaisher took 2 steps back and quietly walked to the door. He reached out to push the door, but found that he couldn't. So, after thanking me, you still want to take revenge, right? He sighed helplessly. Revenge? It's not revenge. What revenge can there be? The prince said, the reason why I'm here is just to fulfill their last wish. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. I'm just an employee. Why don't you go and get rid of the kitten? That guy is the culprit, Huaishur said carelessly. He secretly raised his guard and focused on dealing with the huge pressure from the prince. You may have misunderstood. The prince raised the corner of his mouth and smiled brightly. My purpose is not to kill anything, and I don't want to kill you here. I just want to finish the work they haven't finished. Since you've stepped into this place and have the qualifications, then you must have been aware of it long ago, right? With that, he slowly pulled out his sword, pointed at Huaishur, and said solemnly, Come on, let us finish each other's final work. Huaishur was stunned. Unbelievable. The challenger is Huaishur, and the opponent is the prince. He announced in an impassioned tone, In the name of the paradise, I accept Huaishur's popularity challenge. On this stage where we used to be in the last legend left behind by us in the past, I invite all the audience to bear witness. I invite all the audience to recognize. I invite all the audience to watch here. And I invite all the audience to listen here. In the prince's solemn announcement, the impassioned words spread in all directions. At that moment, the silent kitten paradise suddenly lit up. Colorful neon lights and gentle and cheerful music rose from every corner of the park. The bleak darkness was illuminated by the lights, and countless phantoms of the past appeared and wandered among them. The merry-go-round and the Ferris wheel began to run again. Cheers and applause filled every corner. A dazzling golden light descended from the sky and illuminated the dilapidated theater where Huaishur was. Time reversed, and the dilapidated stage was restored to its former splendor. The dust-covered seats were spotless again. One by one, the audience appeared on the seats. Not only the figure of the kitten, but there was also Loalimi, who was hugging a pipa and covering her face with a paper fan. There were also all kinds of strange creatures and abyssal creatures that he had never seen before, and the leaders of the large group entrenched in Yamatai, the kings of darkness. As Paradise's favor descended once again, a loud bell sound spread out in all directions. Wherever the bell sound passed, countless people were awakened from their deep sleep and raised their heads in astonishment. Immediately, they felt a pull of gravity, and their bodies involuntarily rose into the air. Then, in a blur, they appeared on the seats of the theater. In the blink of an eye, there were no empty seats. Not only Yuan Zhao and Yishueya, but also Hu Pe and Sali, and many more faces that he did not know. In the end, Huaishur even saw Luo Xian, whom he had not seen for a long time. She sat quietly in the audience seats, as if she did not understand what had happened. Very quickly, she nodded her head in understanding and waved to Huaishur with a gentle smile. But for some reason, she was wearing a rather classical maid outfit, with a lace wreath on her head. It was as if she was ready to consecrate the omelet rice at any time and cast a love spell on it. All right, Huaishur's mouth twitched. As long as you were happy, not only all the contestants, but even the camera in the live broadcast room automatically turned to look at them. The audience, who had not been able to watch anything interesting during the long night, woke up with a start and looked at Prince and Huaishur under the spotlight in astonishment. On the VIP seats, the representatives who had just started chatting were attracted. They raised their heads, and when they saw Huaishur's face, they could not help but be stunned for a long time. Why the F*** CK is it you again? How old are ya? After the initial shock, the big cousin could not help but laugh softly. Young people can always surprise people. Prince? How enviable. As the spotlight shone, under the gazes of countless people, the prince waved his hand, and the sound of a horse neighing could be heard. A pure white horse galloped out of the void and stopped beside him. The prince stepped into the stirrups and rode the horse. He lowered his head and looked at Huaishur below the stage, revealing a smile. Come, young man. He gripped his sword tightly and pointed it at the young man's face. Let me personally determine whether or not you have the qualifications to inherit this honorable crown." As a result, countless people's gazes fell on Huaishir's body. In the silence, he silently looked around at the audience, and finally, his gaze fell on the prince. He looked at his white horse, looked at his sword, and then looked at his awe-inspiring, solemn expression. It could be said that he had tempered his posture thousands of times, without any flaws, and was proud of his fighting spirit. He did not speak, but for some reason, he suddenly felt excited. His blood seemed to be boiling, impatiently rushing through his body, emitting a burning temperature. Origin's substance rose like flames, rushing out from the crack in his chest. He felt joy and anticipation emerge from the depths of his soul. He slowly reached out and gripped the sacrificial knife and axe tightly, causing the steel to collide and burst forth with a joyful cry, calming all the restlessness and noise in his heart. Only a calm and simple rhythm was left. "Then, Your Highness, in accordance with the rules of the paradise, I hereby challenge you." The young man revealed a smile, raised his head, and stepped forward. Under the scrutiny and gazes of the audience, he walked onto the stage that belonged only to him. This was indeed a battlefield that made him endlessly happy, a battle that made him go all out, an opponent that made him feel respect from the bottom of his heart. Was this not what he had been looking forward to all this time? Thus, there is no need for more worry and fear, no need for those senseless pretenses and lies. Astronomy Association, Huaishir, please enlighten me. Chapter 235. Wait, the Astronomy Society. The moment Huaishir revealed his identity, countless people looked at each other in shock. The audience was in an uproar. In the VIP seats, Mr. Laoqing, who was still on in full drip, widened his eyes and pointed at the young man on the screen. He was so shocked and angry that he almost fainted. "I told you that he's not one of us. You didn't believe me." He glared at the representative of the Seven Stars Group, but found that the representative of the Seven Stars Group was glaring at him even more angrily. The people of Ingzhou are too shameless. The representative of the Seven Stars Group gritted his teeth and looked away. He whispered to the person next to him, "They're still trying to frame the Astronomy Society at this time." "Yes, yes." Big Cousin sighed and nodded. He patted the representative of the Seven Stars Group on the shoulder and said, "They've always been like this. You'll get used to it." Wah! Mr. Laoqing's body suddenly shook and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He shouted something hoarsely, but under Big Cousin's signal, he was immediately pulled into the infirmary to be resuscitated. He's old and his health is not good. Don't force yourself to attend events. Big Cousin sighed and said to his assistant, "Let the old man recuperate. Don't come out and get angry. What if he gets sick from being angry? It's fine if he scams us, but now he's even scamming the Astronomy Society. I can't stand it anymore, right, Minister Liu?" "Huh? Yes." Next to him, the deputy minister of the Astronomy Society's Jinling branch, the middle-aged man, nodded vigorously and smiled guiltily. "That kid, why does he look more and more familiar? I think I've seen him before." What a comforting gaze. On the stage under the blazing spotlight, the prince stared at the young man's face and smiled happily. "Very good, come on, young man." He pulled the reins slightly and gripped the blade tightly. "Let's fight fair and square." The iron hooves thundered. The white horse neighed, and a gust of wind blew. The handsome white horse's hooves shot out lightning as it galloped like a train. The blade on the horse's back slashed down. It missed. "You steps." At this critical juncture, he stepped forward, turned around, and brushed past the horse's head as he turned to the left. Huaishir's saber and axe followed his body and drew two sharp arcs in the air, chopping towards the horse's head. Bang! The blade of the sword pierced through, and sparks flew. Then, the white horse stood on its hind legs and trampled towards Huaishir's face. Huaishir dodged again, but the moment the iron hooves fell, a hurricane and thunder erupted from the warhorse's stomp. A suffocating wave of air rolled in all directions. Huaishir was sent flying. The white horse came to a stop, and as the prince pulled on the reins, it galloped forward as fast as lightning. The sword on the horse's back was like a snake, chasing after Huaishi's throat and thrusting out. In the blink of an eye, he had crossed a long distance. But then the impact came to an abrupt stop. In its place, a chain had appeared out of nowhere. It was connected to the carpet on the stage, and the other end was wrapped around the neck of the warhorse. It was tied up. Obviously, it looked like a normal carpet, but at this moment, it was as indestructible as steel on the stage. No matter how the white horse trampled or pulled, it was not enough to destroy it. The prince raised his sword and slashed downwards, and the chain snapped. Huaishi's vision went dark as he felt the origin substance vibrate. The chain returned to his hand and wrapped around his arm, closing the gap. That sword was definitely a divine weapon. No matter how he thought about it, the prince's treasured sword should not be ordinary, right? It was just like the prince's white horse. All evil people would fall before the prince's sharp sword, just like how the prince's white horse would easily surmount all obstacles. This was like a Prince Charming that had walked out of the legends. He was a hero who had been tasked by the heavens to slay an evil dragon and save a young girl from danger. Even if he only existed here, even if he only existed tonight, awesome. Huaishi steadied himself and gripped his saber and axe tightly. He couldn't help but want to laugh. Joy, excitement, anticipation, and a heartfelt honor. This kind of opponent, this kind of enemy, this kind of hero, this kind of battle was simply as beautiful as a dream. Just by discovering that the enemy was standing in front of him, he could feel an indescribable sense of anticipation. In the quiet orchard gym, on the television in front of dozens of muscular men, the youth's current smile was displayed. It was as if a flame had lit up in his eyes. It carried a blazing glow that made people not dare to look directly at it. Excited, aren't you, Huaishi? The old man holding the protein powder laughed softly and muttered to himself, that kind of feeling as if your soul is burning. The so-called battle is such a carefree thing. The so-called opponent is such a lovable existence. It is precisely because of this, only this, that victory is something worth pursuing. And so, on the screen, Huaishi stepped forward towards his opponent. Again, the youth murmured in a low voice. The saber and axe in his hand dissipated, and a resplendent glow condensed. The outline of the cross-shaped spear grew from his hand. On the spear's blade, endless dragon blood flowed down like tears. That was the posture of a fully focused attack. Just by bending the waist, there was the low sound of a bowstring being tightened. Just by taking a step, there was the roar of breaking through the air. The blue-crowned dragon turned into a rain of mist, sprinkling from the blade of the spear. Wherever it passed, the color of irises grew from the scarlet carpet. Like pieces of embroidery, they appeared on the surface of the carpet. The branches and leaves swayed, and the flowers bloomed. A refreshing fragrance spread out, and a point of light, like a falling star, had already penetrated a distance of more than 10 meters, whistling. The white horse retreated, and the spear continued to move forward, so the white horse retreated again. The blade of the sword slashed, and the spear's tip swung the blade away. The iron hooves trampled, and the spear's body broke the iron hooves. It was like a mighty meteor falling from the sky. In the blink of an eye, the white horse's slender face was cut open, leaving behind a scarlet scar on its handsome face. The white horse neighed in pain, and a trace of fatigue emerged from its spirited spirit, and the spear's blade stabbed into the ground. But Huaishi was still moving forward. So in an instant, the spear's body bent like a bow, suddenly bounced, propping the youth up and flying into the air. The blade of the axe appeared in his hand, and he aimed at the prince who was close at hand. Cut! The sound of metal colliding burst forth. The white horse retreated. On the horse's back, the prince raised the long sword in his hand in astonishment and saw the gap on it. A wisp of gold fell from his temple, fluttering in the air, and finally fell into the white horse's blood on the ground. It was so eye-catching. Is this all you've got, your highness? Huaishi landed on the ground, casually waving the weapon in his hand with a pleasant smile. If it's a warm-up, it should be over, right? Can't you be satisfied with such a battle, Huaishi? On the white horse, the prince looked down at him. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes, and he slowly nodded. Very good. Then let's go one step further. The blade of the sword fell, issuing a silent order. The horse's hooves trampled on the stage, like the beating of a huge iron drum, and the roar burst forth. So, countless figures appeared from the backstage, hurriedly running, as if blood was flowing in their veins. In an instant, the lighting team was in place, the prop team was in place, the scheduling team was in place, the mechanical team was in place, and finally, the director team was in place. As if it had been given a soul, at this moment, this ancient theater once again glowed with the brilliance of the past. This stage was alive. Don't be careless. Why sure? The prince smiled and looked around his country. The show has just begun. Behind him, behind the countless rolling curtains, a light suddenly emerged, reflecting on the sky, forming a rotating countdown. 3, 2, 1. Action. The ancient stage board was slowly raised and suddenly closed, bursting forth with a crisp sound. In an instant, the whole stage shook violently. The rainbow lights changed rapidly, and countless machines were operating violently. With the rotation of gears, countless hubs were combined, and the rise and fall of elevators, countless props rose and disappeared from the slowly rotating stage. With the change of pure colors, the presence and absence of props, and the change of the background on the fabric curtain, the climate of the 4 seasons of the world was interwoven, evolving into the scenery of thousands of mountains and rivers. The world had been condensed on this small stage, and the performance of the princes had already begun. Be careful, the prince shouted. The white horse neighed and rallied. The iron hooves trampled on the gray carpet, and with the rise of the elevators, it jumped between countless props and fake stones, as if galloping on a towering mountain range, stepping on the protrusions on the cliff, and swooping down toward Huaishur. No, at this moment, what appeared in front of him should be a real mountain. Even if it was just a background and an abstract prop, at this moment, the effect formed was no different from a real mountain. Huaishur was already halfway up the mountain. When he raised his head, he could feel the heavy pressure exerted by the towering mountain range, as well as the prince who was diving down from the top of the mountain. His momentum was like a rolling stone as he pressed forward, and his agility and swiftness were as if he was walking on flat ground between the mountains. Sweeping down from the top of the mountain, there was a whistling wind. The sky was gray, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. The huge pressure of the whole world covered him, making it difficult for him to move. In just a moment of shock, the white horse was already close to him like a light. On the horse's back, the prince's sharp sword slashed down. Huaishur subconsciously dodged and blocked, but he could not resist the huge force and was sent flying. In the air, he looked around, only to see the white horse jump up, as if it was stepping on the air, and rush toward him. Wasn't it too much to bring a vehicle to crash into him? Huaishur swung his hand, and the iron chain flew out, pulling him to the ground. Huaishur turned in the air, dodged the trampling hooves of the white horse, and landed awkwardly. But as soon as he landed, he saw the color of the carpet turned dark blue. A deep blue color appeared on the big screen behind him. In the projection of the sky, countless schools of fish could be vaguely seen. The floor flipped, and suddenly a picture of a coral reef flipped out. On the guide rails on the ceiling, boards painted with the pattern of waves hung down, moving up and down with the movement of the guide rails. This was the ocean. In the blink of an eye, gravity changed, and Huaishur was suffocated. The white horse that fell from the sky broke through the air and into the sea, swaying its body nimbly, swimming back and forth in the sea, and rushed toward Huaishur with a white horse on its back. Where did you come from, Liu? Huaishur's eyes widened, and he slowly turned over in the waterless sea. Looking at the white horse that was getting closer and closer, he suddenly smiled. In his hand, the knife and axe appeared. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.